All right, I want to welcome everyone to our ConvergeOne National Cybersecurity Summit. I appreciate you spending the next 4 hours with us as we walk through a lot of different topics focused on cybersecurity. Our goal is that you take something away today that you can put in practice in your security program within your environment. So my name is Chris Ripke. I'm our National Practice Director here for our cybersecurity practice at ConvergeOne. So I want to take a couple minutes before we get to our keynote speaker here to just really to introduce you to ConvergeOne. If you're new, if you're a customer of ours, thank you for being a customer. But if you're new to ConvergeOne, I just want to give you kind of a little background on our cybersecurity team. We're very passionate about making sure we help protect our customers, around prevent, detect, and recover from modern threats. Right? We have like this slide mentioned, we have a award-winning program. We have highly skilled people within our pre-sales and post-sales. We were on the Cybersecurity 500 3 years in a row. Our own Tim Femister has been featured on Lifetime Television's Designing Spaces, where we talked about dealing with secure remote workforce during the pandemic and kind of how that shift work from home was working. We're a top 10 partner amongst our industry-leading OEMs. And one of the biggest things that we pride ourselves on is leading services across, we're around cloud security. So we're helping customers realize that journey and protecting their cloud infrastructure, and then our platforms, and then GRC. And we have a ton more services that we can kind of offer our customers. So moving right along, I want to introduce our next speaker to you. Our next speaker is MK Palmore. He's the Field Chief Security Officer for Palo Alto Networks. So I had the pleasure of listening to MK a couple months ago, and he was one of the first person that came to mind in order to make sure that he gets to really speak to our audience here and our customers. So he's a thought leader, an evangelist on the cyber threat landscape. One of the biggest things that MK provides is as part of his background and experience that he brings to the customers of Palo Alto is that he was the former special agent in charge of the cyber branch of the FBI, where he served in the San Francisco Bay Area. So with that said, I want to introduce MK and take it away.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. Let me just get my presentation set up here. This is a first for me today, by the way. Been in the security industry for quite some time now, and for the first time, I get to share the virtual stage with Mr. Krebs. So that's a highlight. I will be walking away now, noting that I got to share the stage with Brian Krebs. So certainly appreciate the opportunity to speak to this group. As Chris indicated, my name is MK Palmore. I'm a Field Chief Security Officer for Palo Alto Networks. I have spent the better part of the last decade or so evangelizing and speaking, first on behalf of the FBI and now on behalf of Palo Alto Networks, on observations of the cyber threat landscape. And I got an opportunity during my time in the Bureau over the course of a 22-year career to really get a sense of what large-scale organizations were dealing with as issues related to cybersecurity really began to gain prominence. Certainly comments, reports, and things like the reports from Krebs on security began to really take note of how the landscape in terms of the business environment, digital systems, use of data and information began to change, and quite frankly, how organizations like the FBI realized that they had to level up their skill sets and capabilities to begin engaging some of these adversaries and the adversarial behavior. And so I'll comment on some of that as I go along through these observations of the threat landscape. As Chris indicated, I am 2+ years on board with Palo Alto Networks. I spend my time at Palo Alto Networks largely engaging our customer base. Probably 80% of my time is in front of customers, having conversations around strategic advisory, cybersecurity related issues, and then another 20% of my time on industry related events and having the opportunity again to make some observations of what it is that we all deal with as either vendors in this industry or folks in large part a part of large enterprises being impacted by all that is going on. So it clear to everyone, purpose behind conferences or talks like these, there's not a week that goes by that as an industry, we don't see some clear indication that our digital systems are under assault, that large-scale enterprises need to be thinking differently about how they handle their security issues, and frankly, observations that the adversary, and I'm going to talk in a little bit of relative detail about what those personas look like, how, quite frankly, they are winning in large scale and in large part by lapses in cybersecurity strategy, cybersecurity application of the fundamentals within large scale enterprises, and really a lack of focus globally on how to address issues related to cybersecurity. And I think that for as long as we continue to see this type of impact on businesses, we have to recognize that we probably need to be thinking about security differently so that we can begin to change the narrative around the cybersecurity challenges that we face. There's a handful of drivers, I think, pushing us in this direction. And certainly the pandemic of early or late 2019 and through 2020 helped to drive some of this conversation as we, as a workforce and as a society, were all pushed remotely. We began to show heavy reliance on our digital systems and our data, and then recognizing how important it is to secure this information that, quite frankly, was not just vital to our business lives and business operability, but just to our lives as citizens, our ability to connect with family and others, but the prevalence of data on the scene, and really creating then a landscape for the adversary to take advantage of the low-hanging fruit of having most of society operating remotely. It continues to help us to show emphasis on how we should be paying attention to cybersecurity as we move forward as a society. So prevalence of data is certainly one of the drivers. We also saw over the course of the last year a move towards cloud and all things cloud security related, because access to data, issues related to networking required us to really realize that there are benefits to movement to the cloud, and organizations, of course, struggled somewhat with those deployments and ensuring that they are configured properly and ensuring that they have appropriate access to information, but also that the information is secure. Connectivity. There are reports or continual reports that by the year 2025, the expectation is that there will be more than 42 billion devices connected to the internet. If you are like me in any respect, family of five, just in the residential homes of modern day American citizens, you probably have somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 30 devices when you think about desktop computers, tablets, IoT devices within the home. So we're talking about an extraordinary amount of devices connected to the internet. And ultimately, if you're thinking like an adversary, you have to be thinking about how the prevalence of those devices creates then new avenues of approach for the adversary to gain a foothold into your environments. I mentioned the term adversary a couple of times here. During my time in the FBI, we used to bucket adversarial activity into rebroughly 4 types of categories. We thought of them roughly as the advanced persistent threat, which are, of course, nation states. And appreciate that Mr. Krebs had lots of conversational comments about nation state related activity, certainly in the ransomware age that we are all experiencing. The idea that nation states can and will engage in this type of adversarial activity becomes fairly preeminent in terms of how it is that you need to be looking at protecting your enterprise. I also always like to mention the hacktivists or disruptors. You know, it wasn't but a few years ago that we thought that all of the activity associated with hacktivists was essentially diminished, largely due to law enforcement action. And in fact, there was even a recent report of an arrest of a well-noted anonymous member. But what we saw during 2020 is that these groups, largely disparate, not necessarily operating from a common operational picture, are still active and still targeting, in most instances, public sector entities for which they know there's low-hanging fruit and opportunities to gain access and be disruptive to those environments. Of course, insider threat issues, an area that I dealt with prominently as an FBI agent over many years. We have seen this due to the prevalence of intellectual property, the use of digital systems to guard this information, and the relative ease for which we've seen organizations lose their own intellectual property, this is an area that I believe as practitioners, we probably don't pay enough attention to. And so I will likely key on, as we go through this discussion, the need to make sure that as practitioners, you have an understanding as to what your internal systems look like, what normal looks like, and really that establishment of normal is how, as security practitioners, we should be looking at our enterprise moving forward to ensure that we capture anomalies and bring attention to potential activity which could be malicious within your environments. The last persona or adversarial persona is, of course, the financially motivated cybersecurity adversary. These are the folks that are responsible for the vast majority of the activities that happen out on the cyber threat landscape. They are heavily technically capable. They have an entire ecosystem available to them, which allows them the ability to exchange information, exchange intelligence, gather resources, buy exploits, and quite frankly, exist in a way that allows their business model to thrive eminently in the environment that we currently have. We also shouldn't lose sight that in use of our tools, in use of the services that you look to gain from other enterprises like our partners at ConvergeOne and of course organizations like Palo Alto Networks, that if you can employ tools and services and devices that allow you to disrupt the activity of the adversary at any point along the cyber kill chain, you will have successfully disrupted their activity. And so we always have to be insightful about our ability to have visibility along that chain throughout all aspects of the enterprise. So let's do a little bit of a deeper dive into what the current state of play looks like. Probably couldn't have had a better initiation into this than the discussion from Brian Krebs and his observations on what the sort of current state of affairs are, with emphasis, of course, on ransomware. I turn frequently to the team at Verizon and the Verizon data breach report. Our organization contributes to it, as I'm sure do many on the line. Probably one of the most comprehensive annual reports. And if you've paid attention to the trends over the years, it really begins to give you an outlaying picture of where we need to be placing focus and emphasis in the security industry in order to ensure that we shut down some of these avenues of attack that the adversaries have begun to rely on, and quite frankly, be so proficient at carrying out their adversarial behavior and activity. So no surprises annually in this particular look back on the report. Prevalence of external actors, the fact that, of course, most of this activity is financially motivated. I remember hearing a figure some years ago, and of course, there are no real studies on this, but that some adversarial groups, of course, those financially focused, had the capability of earning somewhere in the neighborhood of $150,000 US per month in terms of engaging in persistent and consistent fraud activity. When you think about even the ransomware events that we've talked about already, or those that we will see here in the future, when you think about millions of dollars being spread, in some cases amongst a very small group, it's not hard to arrive at some of those figures. But what we also see in reports like the Verizon report are the continual call outs for what I will call lapses in cybersecurity fundamentals. You know, those little things. If you look at what was the CIS 20, I think it's now CIS 18, critical security controls, this is the area where we always say, or call them fundamentals, maybe we should be calling them principles. These are the areas where we seem to be lacking, either in tools or our strategic consultative approach to cybersecurity, where organizations continually fail to implement tools and services that will allow them to, one, shut down avenues of approach, but more readily identify what looks like anomalous and potentially malicious behavior in their environments. We saw a special call out to ransomware. I think that as you go through this day, this term ransomware, the idea of it, I even have another speaking engagement later on this afternoon as a special call out to that. We will continue to hear about this, and there is a reason behind it, and it's simple. because it works for the adversary. When I used to work bank robbery investigations for the FBI many, many years ago, I was inoculated with that common refrain about why do bank robbers rob banks? Because that's where the money is. They did it because that's where the objective was, and that's where it works. This is the same principle applies for ransomware. For as long as we show as a society that we are either unprepared technically or unwilling to adopt principles, technology, and regulation that will allow us to combat this, the adversary will continue to use it to their advantage because it's a business model that works. If we keep on the theme of ransomware, it's easy then to translate that into the call outs about the industries that we see that are continually impacted by cyber adversarial behavior and activity. And quite frankly, the list really doesn't change from year to year, although I would do a special call out to one industry that is now getting some additional attention. So annually, the list, financial services, and you might include insurance in that, healthcare, which again gets the special call out about ransomware activity targeting healthcare organizations. Of course, because the belief is that an organization like a healthcare entity might be one more responsive to the idea of paying a ransom because they need to get back to an operational capacity more quickly, but also due to the sheer complexity of the environments for what healthcare providers now provide, the technology that's being employed, and their need to now show some emphasis in terms of developing their security teams, they will continue to be targeted, but also the bell has been rung. And so now you should expect to see continually more emphasis by the security apparatus of large-scale healthcare organizations so that they don't get caught flat-footed as it relates to issues like ransomware. Rounding out that top three list, public sector, the sector from which I came from, spent nearly 32 years of a career in government, continually impacted by issues related to security. And there are lots of different reasons why this is the case. I would say if you want to begin the discussion, you start pointing to issues like the prevalent reliance on legacy systems, the inability to really stitch together an informed and heightened security posture. Certainly the acquisition cycle for which public sector entities really don't have a way of changing, although they certainly have an ability to lobby and maybe change the laws that are associated with how they acquire systems. But what we see is a lack of agility in the public sector, which would normally, if they were in private sector business, allow them to pivot quickly to adopt new technologies and, again, to be thinking about security in a more cohesive and strategic and informed pattern, I think could help them defray some of the impact on their enterprises and certainly ward off some of the activity that they consistently see. The fourth industry, which I will highlight, which in my conversations with customers at Palo Alto Networks, which is also gaining a lot of steam, is manufacturing. I think that as we think about complex security environments, there are very few, maybe oil and gas and some others, that really have, when you think about disparate sites, when you think about the adoption of new technologies, whether it be robotics or automation, and the need to send and retrieve data from one location to the next in a secure fashion, you really begin to get a picture of complex security architecture that requires a new look. And that's where concepts like zero trust and other heightened security issues will lead us to a more granular approach to cybersecurity. I mentioned earlier the prevalence of cloud. Nearly every conversation that I have with customers has some component of either a willingness to now look at the cloud in terms of deploying workloads into the cloud, using it for development purposes, data storage, and everything under the sun. It just gives you a certain level of flexibility for which on-prem environments do not have. And of course, there are also cost variance and cost factors, which really have led most organizations to lean heavily into a potential cloud posture or to double down on an investment, which, by the way, is typically a multi-cloud strategy, double down on those investments so that they can, again, even better leverage the beneficial aspects of cloud deployments. Here's the trick though. Recent reporting from our own Unit 42, which is our threat intelligence research team internal at Palo Alto Networks, challenges with going to the cloud seem to be fairly consistent. Insecure configurations, overly permissive environments, the same mistakes that organizations were making in their on-prem environments, they are now making in cloud environments. And when you think about workloads and deployments across a variety of cloud providers, you begin to get a picture and understanding of maybe a platform that gives you visibility into that multi-cloud strategy, but also gives you an opportunity to extend policy throughout your cloud posture so that you can better protect the enterprise. But this is an area that we will continue to see increased concern and activity in. I want to spend a couple of minutes here sort of illuminating something that Brian touched upon in the opening remarks. The ecosystem that the adversaries have available to them. It's like once the momentum has started, this is something that you cannot stop. And I think without, again, additional regulation, additional cooperation by nation states and really the overall society, what we have here is an ecosystem that really feeds this entire capability of adversaries to gain a foothold and ultimately create business models that are self-sustaining for the folks who choose to take their skills and engage in this kind of activity. Some of these figures may be a little outdated as it relates to cost variables associated with how you exchange these assets in the dark web, but here's the takeaway. This ecosystem, again, self-sustaining, it works for them. And when you think about the reliance now on digital currency, which is, of course, a foundational piece of the ransomware debacle that we are all experiencing, when you think about the ability to now translate not just tools, services, and activity, but literally have a form of currency exchange that, by all accounts, is fairly difficult to track and fairly difficult to understand for the layman, it makes it, again, an environment, an ecosystem that we will continue to see thrive and continue to proliferate the adversarial activity. Now, I will take a moment here to applaud my former colleagues at the FBI. I can tell you that when I was leading the team at San Francisco, one of the things that I saw walking out the door was this growing prevalence of digital currency theft, a reliance on digital currency within this ecosystem. And I will tell you that the capabilities of the Bureau, that was sort of a knock at the door. Folks needed to understand that we needed to develop an enhanced capability that would allow organizations like the FBI not only to better understand blockchain technology, but how to track it, how to intercede it, how to get, position yourself to take law enforcement action when necessary. And I think that when I think about the how that has transpired over time, I've been out of the Bureau for over 2 years now, but when I think about the recent related news, that tells me that organizations like the Bureau really have stepped up their game in terms of the capabilities. And so the ability to retrieve some of that ransom associated with the Colonial Pipeline ransomware event is an indication to us that law enforcement entities who still have, quite frankly, a long road to hoe in this respect are gaining capabilities and insights that may act as a deterrent. But here's the flip side of that. We know the cybersecurity adversary is one of the most agile adversaries on the planet. What they have shown an ability to do year over year is when obstacles are put in their place, they have an ability to pivot, change methodologies, and engage in a different way for which law enforcement typically has a long tail for which they have to catch up to what those capabilities and abilities look like. And I think we will continue to see that. So some top level observations of the industry overall. When I say the industry, I mean the landscape globally. We know that the adversary continues to win on a large scale. For the good guys, everyone on the line, those of us in society not engaged in this activity, there are a couple of things, those drivers I talked about, issues related to cloud, certainly the connectivity issue, secure remote access, all of this kind of converging in the issue of SASE or Secure Access Service Edge. I think in the industry, we will begin to see a consolidation of cybersecurity companies, at least to the point where folks will tend to look for companies that are in a position to provide them a platform from which they can then consume cybersecurity capabilities. And of course, the idea of security practitioners, this need to be thinking strategically about how to protect your digital systems, how to be thinking about security of the future, getting into those strategic planning stages where you're able to really outline what a 6-month, 12-month, and 18-month strategy might look like in security. We have to push one another to do this, engage in those long-term conversations. Nothing worse than sitting down with a CISO or CIO who's looking backward at how to solve some historical problem, which, yes, we can help you do that. But the next part of that conversation is what the future looks like, what's on the horizon, and how should you be thinking about security moving forward. And I have some ideas about how we are going to all be impacted by that. I talked a little bit about fundamentals, those things that continue to sort of catch us in the rear end as it relates to cybersecurity. Again, I turn to the CIS 20, now 18 controls. I guess they're just the CIS security controls now. And we begin to think about, in really substantive form, how we need to get back to the basics of security, but be thinking more holistically about security, but actually doubling down on some of the principles that, quite frankly, are at the core of security practices. I touched on the idea of zero trust, which I'll hit on again in a minute here, but the idea of least privilege, the idea of granular understanding of the security environment, the idea that secure configurations not only give us the ability to provide protection to environments, but it shuts down the available vulnerabilities for which an adversary might be able to target your enterprise. These are all things I think that are common thought within security organizations, but I take you back to that security team in many organizations that spend too much time looking backward and not enough time understanding that the team has to divide their resources. You need to have folks focused on solving the problems, but there should always be a few folks, certainly the leadership, with an eye towards the future, how it is that you should be building security within an organization and thinking about the security apparatus of the future, which will allow you to, again, buffet the types of attacks or create a more resilient apparatus so that your return to good might be more quickly achieved. I mentioned the idea of a platform approach and more different consumption models and methods from vendors and other organizations. There are lots of pluses to the idea of a platform approach and consolidating your tools. I will only key in on theoretically the one idea that there's nothing worse than going into a security environment and seeing vendor sprawl. You have to understand that there is no way in an environment like that with vendor sprawl that you have the capability of really getting your hands virtually wrapped around what that security environment looks like. And so not just from a capability standpoint, but from a visibility standpoint, an efficiency standpoint, and ultimately a total cost of ownership perspective, folks need to be thinking differently about how they consume security products, identifying security products that are integrated to work together and represent best in breed or best in class capabilities while offering you an extended portfolio of solutions within those capabilities. A couple of the areas that we like to emphasize at Palo Alto Networks in terms of how it is that we look at the security landscape, I will drill down just into four. And again, these are not just pertinent to Palo Alto Networks, but certainly pertinent to any security practitioner. Before I go into this, I'll note to you guys that I had the opportunity to lead the FBI's Security Operations Center back in 2018 for several months. I was asked to come in, provide some leadership to a very, very large and disparate team. And one of the things during that temporary assignment that kept me up at night was the idea. You land in a new security environment, you start asking the right questions, and you don't always like the answers that you get, right? One of the things that kept me up at night was the idea of visibility. For security practitioners, visibility has to be number one. If you can't see what's going on in your environment, you can't protect against it. If you can't see it, you can't even think and begin to philosophize how you're going to plan around it. There's no strategy if you can't see what's going on in your environment. So the idea of visibility within your security environment should be the number one issue that you are planning to tackle as you go about implementing a security strategy. Reduction of the attack surface. We've spent a ton of time already in this particular conference talking about how adversaries really are successful in what it is that they do. And one of the reasons is that the attack surface is enormous. They have lots of different opportunities to gain a foothold into enterprises. And so part of what you can do in terms of planning is figure out how to shut down some of those avenues of approach. Reduction of the attack surface becomes key. And then the idea, certainly from a user behavior analytics or a anomaly detection, understanding what the known and unknown potential threats are in your environment. And again, this comes from a deep understanding of what normal looks like. What does that mean for security practitioners moving forward? What's the future look like for all of us? It boils down, I think, to three subjects, a couple of which I've touched upon already. The third that I will double click on here for you quickly, cloud security. The cloud is where we're all headed. If you are not effectively postured or thinking about what your cloud workloads, what your cloud deployment will look like, what your visibility into the cloud will look like, you are behind the eight ball. This is where we're all headed. Cloud security will become a topic for which we will spend a tremendous amount of time. I am a huge proponent of the concept of automation and practical use of automation. There are lots of issues impacting the security industry, not the least of which is the continual vastness of open positions that we have. We can't throw people at every problem that we have in security. I do think that we can cover some of the gap through effective use of automation. And so you should be thinking about, as you look forward in terms of your security apparatus, how you will better leverage automation in terms of what your future outlook may be. There are processes, there are implementations, there are things that you can do within your environment in an automated fashion that will allow you to take that limited cadre of personnel and focus and point them towards issues that they can now spend human brain power and time addressing. I touched on very quickly the concept of zero trust. Zero trust has been talked about in our industry for a number of years. It is now time for us to be thinking about, as organizations, how we embark on this all-important journey of zero trust. And I call it a journey because I think, based on the continuing scale and growth of enterprises, there's probably no end to this, but you should start now. And it's not just, of course, the assumption of a single tool, product, or service. It's really reframing how it is that you look at your environment and how you approach security, thinking about it from a very granular process capability, but also how you take that all-important security policy and extend it out to every element within the enterprise. Folks, I appreciate the opportunity to touch on some of these subjects, again, following Brian Krebs, talking about challenges on the security landscape. Again, my name is MK Palmore. I'm a field CSO for Palo Alto Networks. And Chris, I will turn it back over to you. Thanks.
All right, MK, thank you very much for the presentation today. Hopefully our customers found it, very valuable in understanding the threat landscape today, right? So we're going to take a break for a little bit, but I've got a lot of inquiries about the recordings, and so we will we'll follow up at the conclusion of the event with a link to the recording plus a link to register for some of the things we're going to talk about in the future. So we're going to take a break now to till 2:30 Eastern time. So that's 1:30 Central time. And I appreciate everyone's time already this morning, but we're going to take a break till 2:30. MK, thank you very much again, and we look forward to talking to you in the future. All right, it's time to get going again. So I hope everyone had a good short, quick break. We're going to continue with the agenda and keep on schedule. So it is my pleasure to introduce Tarek and Mani and Kaheen Murphy. They're part of our cybersecurity team here at ConvergeOne. They're going to walk you through, talk to you a little about some ransomware landscape and really some simple steps to help prevent it. So gentlemen, take it away.
Thank you, Chris. Once again, thanks everyone. Hopefully you're enjoying the whiskey. Save some till the end of the session so we can figure out how to properly match it up with all the notes and stuff. So once again, we're going to expand on the conversation we had earlier, with Brian Krebs and MK Palmore. Those are some big shoes to follow, but I'm pretty sure we'll get into the technical twist of this, kind of show you some ransomware. We'll walk through some of the highlights, right? We'll reference, a little bit in depth of some of the examples that were brought up in the previous sessions. We'll talk a little bit about the ransomware business model, and some of the changes as of, earlier today, things within legislation that are starting to focus more, on, cybersecurity becoming a national issue and some of the bills that are being proposed. We'll kind of touch on that. I'm going to touch a little bit on similarities between ransomware and business analytics, right? There's some shockingly, really, there's a lot of parallels between how attackers are able to use their tools from discovery, reconnaissance. So we'll touch on that, and then we'll go into the demo and hopefully we'll leave some time for some Q&A. So who are we? I'm Tarek and Mani. I'm the Chief Technology Architect. So I'm the security product lead for our national practice. I've got, various experience, in design engineering, from construction, management operations. I've worked in manufacturing, and then I've also worked for the vendors when it comes to cybersecurity. Been in the industry for over 15 years. With me, I've got Kaheen Murphy. So he's our certified ethical hacker, former red teamer. Really glad that he's part of the ConvergeOne team. He'll be the one leading the ransomware demo. Kind of going through some of the tool sets, things like that, and hopefully show how simple it is to launch a ransomware attack. So what's the beef with oil? As we know recently, ransomware has always affected personal data with breaches that target our personal information. Just like Krebs mentioned earlier, credit card data was, the main, motivator on why attackers launched their campaigns, right? Personal information was critical, it was profitable, and it ranged from credit card information, social security numbers, email addresses, right, to launch attacks, things like that. Anything that could be sold in the dark web usually was around those lists, those databases. As the ransomware industry has transformed based on some of the things that we're seeing out in the public, especially as of recent, the attacks are affecting our national supply chain. Yeah, which is not only, us in the cybersecurity industry, we've always seen how important and how big of an issue cybersecurity was, but it's gained more of the mainstream media. Everyone's pretty aware and everyone's been affected by cybersecurity, whether it's, the leaking of your personal data and having that free, subscription to whichever, service that these companies are offering. But especially as of recently, the cyber attack that affected, our oil industry, it affected 50 million Americans, from the Southeast to the Northwest. In the past, and when I say in the past, I'm talking 6 months ago, any disruption to oil supply was tied to an upcoming natural disaster, such as a hurricane. Well, there's a little bit of planning, Mr. Musk, for the folks that, our EV would extend batteries and stuff to try to get you out of there. Disruptions in political climate, right? So if there's sanctions, right, there was always planning, there was a slight uptick in gas prices. That was the extent of how we would plan around, disruptions to the oil supply. But if you look recently, as of a few months ago, whenever the cyber attack hit our critical infrastructure, there was no planning around it. There was folks stranded at the gas stations, out of gas, once that happened. And that really caused, a lot of, actions to take place. And now that's kind of the forefront of, our national security issue. kind of taking a shift, just like MK Palmore brought up, the different industries and what are the ones that are most affected right now. We're starting to see an uptick in manufacturing. That's, it's always been there, but it's actually becoming, it's coming more to light as it starts to, affect consumers, right? The other one was the largest meat processing company. This company processes 200,000 cattle, 500,000 hogs, 45 million chickens, and 800,000 small stock per week, which results to about 32 billion pounds of product per year. Now, the timing is critical. I didn't really feel it. I know some of us, in the audience may have, but if this happened during the 4th of July weekend, man, I would have had a fit. If I can't grill or if I have to pay double or triple the price for chicken, that might be a vegan July 4th weekend for me. I don't know about you. But at the end of the day, really, what happened was that these two companies that had the cyber attack paid a ransom, and it's published. The company that got hit with the gas, the oil supply issue paid around $5 million, and then the meat processing factory paid around $11 million. And it was all in the interest of national security. So it was critical why they had to pay it. And this is where it kind of gets into ransomware as a service, right? Something that Krebs mentioned earlier, and I call him Krebs. Sorry if I'm a little too informal, but it's Krebs on security, so that always pops in. But typing in Russian, that's a not gonna lie, that's a pretty effective, ransomware defense strategy. But you're not going to find that in any sort of minor attack framework that I'll kind of dig into earlier. And for anyone who read this article and heard, Brian speak a little bit about that, if you think that's part of your cybersecurity program, feel free to reach out to us. We promise, we're not going to teach you how to speak Russian, but maybe we could provide some alternative approach to your cybersecurity program. All right, so heightened awareness. So as a result of all this, what's in the media, all the interesting journalism that's been captured, and then the recent attacks, right? There's been some debates within the cybersecurity industry. The evolution of cryptocurrency, which we know, is a transactional source. It's how attackers, receive payment for their ransom. The FBI guidance for many years was that companies who fall victim should not negotiate with or pay the attackers. There is a debate now to take it a step further. I don't know how far it is, if it's in Senate or if there's legislation coming out, but really there's a push, on one side of the equation to make payment legal, altogether. And that created a debate from the opposite side, so if you're an oil and gas company and, or healthcare where you can't afford to be down, is that really the right approach, when it comes to uptime, where it comes to, national security, things like that. Once one of these, critical infrastructures, go offline, right? Well, what's the resolution at that point, So there has to be some thought process, but just to kind of keep everyone up to speed, that there is a lot of movement into the, different areas of ransomware and how, payments distributed, and there's certain, discussions on, taking it one step further. Once again, cybersecurity, national issue. White House recently released an executive order. Of all the executive orders since 1994, which are several hundred, the first executive order came out in around 2013. A couple more came out in 2015, and as of the last 2 years, there's been about, I think, 4 to 5. So about 50% of the executive orders have been released within the last 2 years, which is a pretty serious issue, and it's not going away. Recently, as of 2 days ago, the Geneva summit, President Biden and Putin, both had serious discussions on cybersecurity attacks. So obviously there's a little bit of a political play there, right? When it comes to extraditing cyber criminals, combined with the Russian keyboard, and so there's a little bit of back and forth going on there that's becoming more and more coming in the main news, right? So a lot of heightened awareness around cybersecurity. The other thing is public and private partnerships. So some of the things that that are coming to Congress, that are creating some awareness is having a better partnership between public and private organizations. So, there's discussions on, probably looking at it from a, from a holistic approach, so that, if the government agencies are aware of an attack, how can they help the private sector prepare a little bit better? So there's a lot of discussions, a lot of debate. Once again, and as of today, there was a law or a bill passed in the Senate that's requiring breaches to be supported, to be reported within 24 hours. And this is not just, public sector, but this, the spirit of this bill is going to affect all security breaches, regardless of your organization. So a lot of changes, a lot of discussions that are coming. So ransomware as a service. So once again, it's very structured. It's no longer, once again, it's no one that sits in their basement and just, pounds away at code and then figures out how to go out and do it. It's a very structured, a very distributed network. As we saw within the example, one of the things I wanted to highlight with the 55-year-old woman that was arrested in Miami as she was coming back from Suriname, she was actually a mother of two. So, in addition to a lot of the mistakes that were made, your typical attacker, your hacker, is not me with the man bun or a beard, with the hoodie with, blinky lights. Good thing I have a virtual background. I've got some equipment back here, but anyways, it's not just the technical individual that's responsible for launching the attack. These attackers, or at least this distributed network is very, very sophisticated. I mean, anywhere from, evaluating, if they should take Bitcoin. So there's a little bit of rumbling that they're switching away from Bitcoin, going towards more of a private. I didn't know how you could get more private than Bitcoin, but there's more private cryptocurrencies out there that they're looking at. But one of the things that they're very, very sharp at social engineering, figuring out how to, target, an executive, someone who's, that may not be happy with where they're working, right? You look at some of the attacks just, within Twitter, and how some of the data loss at Twitter wasn't a result of a ransomware attack or anything technical. There was social engineering, where folks were just given access, right? So, there's behavior there as well that also falls within, this network of attacks and what we've seen in the news. The other thing is, try and buy, right? We always offer try and buy, right? It really does, take a lot of skeptical out of the product. Well, the ransomware attackers offer that too. So if you're an organization, right, and you're in the heat of the moment, you need to get your data, whether it's, a specific event, product launch, whatever it is, the timing couldn't be worse, right? You don't trust a decryption key, these organizations will offer you one. So say, just run it for up to, 3 files, make sure you get them back. And then after that, your payment goes up. So once again, it's a very sophisticated, a very, strategic industry when we're talking about ransomware. And then one of the things that Brian spoke about, they're not really in the business of providing encryption services anymore. And I've got a case study I'll kind of jump into. What we're seeing now is just, just steal the data, put it on a shame site, and then just demand an extortion, right? And the reason of this, and there's a lot of conversation out there, is that recovery solutions have definitely improved, so that now folks are starting to leverage assets as disposable, right? Because as your recovery becomes more and more is able to provide you the RTO and the RPO times to recover your business, it really devalues the encryption that these attackers are using. So now, once again, data exfiltration kind of gets back into the main fold here. When we talk about headlines and things like that, we're always talking about, at least the headlines is always capturing, computers were locked down or there's encryption. One of the key things to really notice, and then nothing's really changed from ransomware when it first started, was that data exfiltration was always a key concern for organizations. So ensuring that that encryption happens last is a main point I want to drive, is that as the ransomware industry starts to get away from the encryption attacks, then comes extortion as far as holding your data hostage. So here's a case study for the cyber extortion for Apple. So once again, MK Palmer talked about how organizations that are being targeted are in the billions, right? So really successful organizations are not immune to ransomware, or to extortion. So basically, there was a third-party provider for Apple that had been compromised, where there was secret schematics that were leaked that were going to that affected the Apple spring-loaded event, where they were going to release the new specs of the MacBook Pro and the iMac. The ransomware attackers, they set a $50 million bounty for these schematics. And what was a little odd was that the Apple declined to comment, and then Quanta Computers acknowledged that they were in contact with law enforcement, but the data just disappeared. Wasn't on any website. So that specific how much figure that was paid is not really known. But when you kind of look between the lines, right, you have to kind of come to your own conclusion. Well, if they didn't share the data, so how much was the payment? When you're looking at 50 million. What was the ultimate settlement? So it's, I'd be a little interested to see if anything's released within the last week or so, because I couldn't find a figure on it. So just some key statistics. Total ransomware revenue was around 20 billion in 2020. Once again, that's a 25% bump, or about 50% growth, or 100% growth when you're looking from 2019. The average ransom paid 170K. The highest was 3.2. Look at what happened the last 6 weeks. And the examples that we brought up, a $5 million ransom has been paid, and an $11.5 million ransom has been paid. And one we don't even know yet, but I imagine it's more than 3.2 million if I were to take a stab at it. Nearly 1/3 of data that's ransom businesses paid up. So if you only have to be right once, when you're looking at from an attacker's perspective, only have to be right once. And if you're right once 100 times, and you're going to get a return on revenue at about 33%, that's not a bad return on investment. When you look at the overall market from an attacker's perspective, just looking purely at the numbers. And we talked a little bit about cloud. I don't want to take the thunder out of my experts that are coming in behind me. But once again, data breaches targeting cloud-based infrastructures, right? I mean, it's coming as customers, start to, consume the cloud. Everyone's in some sort of a cloud transformation process, right? Once again, not to completely say cloud is secure, and ransomware resistant. That's not the case. It's as more workloads start to happen, and as disclosures start to come up, we would probably see those numbers start to bubble up a little bit more. So data warehouse and ransomware, once again, there's very, very similar on what type of, data that they provide and how the data is structured. So anyone who's in BI data warehouse, and, when you come in and you make projections on how your business is performing, there's a lot of similarities, on how an attacker can use tools, within the OSINT framework, like Shodan, looking in combo lists in the dark web, and really start to figure out which organizations that they need to go after. If you look at the screenshot, the example over to the left, this is just a database query that uses multiple tables to find out how a specific product is performing. But if you look over to the right, it's just one command. Much easier to build a database of specific hosts that are vulnerable within the network, and you can pivot that and provide that as a service to any attacker that may have a backdoor within a customer's network. Very, very simple to use these tools. Doesn't take anyone who's an expert to become zero to hero. I've done some ransomware demonstrations, and it took me every bit of a weekend to go from not having an infrastructure within a lab, right, to fully understanding on how these tools kind of come together. So I'm going to kick it over to my esteemed colleague, Kaheen Murphy. We've put together kind of a ransomware demo. Over to the left is the attacker, and over to the right is the victim. So I'll give it over to you, Kaheen.
Thank you for that, Tarek. And one of the things I want to point out as well is many people think of ransomware, or when we start thinking about ransomware, we always kind of associate that with email. But WannaCry and Petya actually utilized a vulnerability Eternal Blue exploit in order to gain access to the Windows system. Can you go ahead and pause it right there for a second, Tarek? So in our demo, what we want to do is definitely kind of display how easy it is, again, in order to launch some of these attacks. These tools are obtainable and they don't require a lot of technical knowledge, just to kind of reiterate what Tarek was saying on how to facilitate these particular attacks. In most of the tool sets that you're going to see, well, actually, this entire tool set is pretty much free. When it comes to actual ransomware in the exploitable or the executable ransomware, there are databases out there that you can download and definitely install on a Linux machine that will have all of the executables as well as the binaries for you to build it out. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to launch our tool, and this is a very popular tool. It's called Metasploit Framework. It's used a lot in penetration testing as well as actual attacks. So the first thing I want to do is I want to build a database, right? So in order to do that, I start a workspace, and that workspace is basically going to be a repository for the different attacks that I'm going to launch and to accumulate that data into one place. I can then use that data at a later time for a secondary campaign or actually to sell on the dark web, and it can be found pretty easily. It doesn't take much of a search. So the first part of any attack, of course, is the actual reconnaissance, right, or scan of the system. So I drop in a command in order to pull some targets and kind of figure out what's going on within this particular subnet. And once I do so, I'm going to get a return of data on that. So as this command launches, it's actually going out, kind of scanning that particular subnet, and immediately I get some data back. Now, it's too much to go through, but all that has been housed within the database. So one command, pause it right there for a second, Tarek, if you don't mind. So one command, and I'm able to actually go and see that database. I can see the data that was actually collected, and immediately I find the target. And that target is going to be a Windows 7 machine. So you go, oh, wow, Windows 7. And okay, that's kind of an old machine, but it's still out there. It's still prevalent in the wild. You can find different Windows versions, from Windows 7, even some XP versions in a lot of IoT devices that are truly exploitable today. So this is almost a real world event. And in my penetration testing, I have come across several devices like this. So the first thing I want to do is make sure that this particular device itself is exploitable, right? So I run a second command. It's just a basic scanner, which is a module to this particular framework. Go ahead and pause it right there for a second, Tarek. Oh. There we go. So I go ahead and run a module, and that module actually goes out and says, hey, this device is definitely, it has this exploit. We can absolutely use this exploit in order to launch our attack. Go ahead and hit play, Tarek. I want to see the options, right? And again, I'll pause it right there, if you don't mind. Again, it doesn't take a technical genius in order to launch these attacks, which is one of the reasons why you see ransomware groups. That's why they're very. It's a very easily deployable business model, right? Because you can sit down. I can show my kid how to do these sort of things, right? From there, I want to make sure or check the options, because the tool, again, is helping me out. It's helping me look and view the options that I need. I'm going to go ahead and set whatever options. I definitely need a target host. Once I set that particular option as a target host or the target that I want to attack, I go ahead and pop that in as a variable, and then I just simply run the tool. And as the tool runs, it comes back and lets me know, hey, yes, this machine is definitely exploitable to this particular vulnerability. Now, again, within that same tool set, right, I can go out and say, now I've done this. Now, how do I exploit this? Like, what is the exploit I want to use? So I find the particular exploit that I want to use, which is going to be, again, the Eternal Blue exploit. Again, just showing you how easy it is. It's all built into this particular framework. So I load that particular module, and as that module loads, the next thing I'm going to do, again, is check the options. What options are needed, or what do those options show me that I need to go ahead and pause it real quick for a sec, Tarek, if you don't mind. So from here, I noticed that it drops a payload, all right? So this particular exploit, this module of this exploit is going to drop a particular payload. And that payload is very important, because this payload is how I'm going to actually grab data from the machine, as well as put my malicious software up on the machine and then exploit that software. So the tool that's built into the framework allows for this to happen. Again, setting my host here, setting my target machine, and then because it's going to open up a reverse TCP shell, I want to set my local machine host. I want to set the listener on this particular box in order to grab that information or listen for that particular TCP opening come on. And then my favorite command out of all this is the exploit command. Go ahead and pause it there real quick for a sec, Target, if you don't mind. So again, using this tool, it's one of my favorite tools again. And again, that's probably my favorite command is just simply exploit. Now, from here, what we can see is several things go out. The first thing that we notice as well in this machine is that the actual attacking machine goes out and does another check on that device. Well, then what it starts doing is it starts actually running the exploit, right? And what Eternal Blue does. And Eternal Blue actually exploits the SMB version 1. So it finds the exploit, it starts running, and then it delivers the payload. And as you can see from the tool set itself, I get a win. Well, what does win mean? Well, win means that I've won. I've gotten into the box. This box has officially been popped now. And just to show that, I go and say, hey, you know what? Let's run a sysinfo. Let's see what other information I can exfiltrate or validate what I'm getting at. And again, all of this data can then be pushed back into a database and then resold or used again. I also want to check the user. Am I going to have to do privilege escalation there? And no, I'm logged in as a system user. A system user on a Windows machine can pretty much have rights everywhere. The other thing that I want to do or could do at this point is load up other modules. Go ahead and pause it for me, Tarek, if you don't mind. I can load up some other modules in at this point, and with those modules, I can actually execute some other commands. But the first thing I want to do at this point is like, what directory am I in? I want to see the directory I'm in. And I noticed that at this point, I'm in the users desktop directory, desktop folder. And there's some file there, and it's called some file, but this could be other data, right? It could be very sensitive data, confidential data. It could be in the form of XLS file, anything. The object of this next thing is to grab that file. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and download the file to my desktop. Is it playing? And that way I can open that file or use that file at a later time. Okay. So once I grab that file, the other thing that I can do here is try to grab the hashes, right? I want other passwords. I want to kind of maintain accessibility to this device. So I'm going to run another command here. It's called hash dump. It's going to dump the users. It's going to dump their password hashes. I can then take those hashes and load them up into, say, another program like John the Ripper and get those passwords back in plain text. From here, it's time for me to go ahead and upload my malicious software. And again, the key to this is what I'm doing is exfiltrating data first, and now I'm going to upload the ransomware. So you can see I pull the ransomware file. On the right, you can see it actually end up on the desktop. Also from here, I do have a next generation endpoint solution running. It is in audit mode, so we can launch the malware, but in reality, it should be catching these things. So the next thing to do is to actually explode the malware. And that's what I'm going to run next. And I'm doing this all remotely. So it doesn't matter if I'm, in the lab. I could be sitting in another country and have accessibility to this device and as well, and then launch it from there. So I'm going to launch the malware here. And Tarek, why don't we go ahead and fast forward a little bit through this. So we can see the malware deposits files or it opens up and exploits. But the key here is that, was it caught or was it seen? And yes, it is seen. But the immediate thing to notice is that none of the encryption happens immediately. So I go through again, just showing that, hey, yes, I'm seeing the exe, I see the files being deposited on the desktop. And the reason we utilize the desktop is just so we can give you something to see. But in reality, I could have put this in a hidden directory or a System32 directory or something that is not noticeable immediately by the target or the user on the target. And again, from there, you can see that the malware explodes. So the key points to this, or a couple key points here real quickly, is how do we get into some simple things to prevent that, right? Easy preventative measures would be make sure you update your OS and patch, right? These things are patches available. The other thing is to make sure you have visibility. You got to know that you have a Windows 7 box on your network. Also installing the next gen endpoint solution, whatever that may be. Have regular system file and backups, right? And test those backups. Don't just have them sitting there, test those backups. Exercise caution, of course, when opening emails, and always keep your sensitive information safe. If it's going to be remaining on your workstation, make sure it's encrypted with some type of local encryption program. And from there, I would say definitely follow some type of framework, such as the NIST cybersecurity framework of identifying, protecting, detecting, responding, and recovering. It kind of goes through how to defend against these particular attacks in stages, right? In each stage of that. If with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Tarek, to kind of wrap us up here.
Oh, thank you, Kaheen. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty interesting on how easy that vulnerability was, and that vulnerability still exists within the industry. So I'm gonna speed this up. I know we're kind of getting close on time, but the key takeaways for this session is that ransomware, once again, often tied to encryption only. Data exfiltration rarely makes the headline. So remember, encryption, if it happens last, right? So data exfiltration in the demonstration that we provided you by pulling that file off that user's vulnerable machine is pretty easy to do. Assume that adversaries are successful, meaning that they're in your network, right? What we're seeing within the cybersecurity industry, especially around ransomware and the attackers, is that there are plenty of black doors that haven't been exploited yet. Some things like banking trojans, things like that. So with the overall improvement of phishing, end user awareness, email gateways, things like that, the attackers are leveraging, previous known backdoors within organizations to also, leverage, their attack vectors as well. So once again, as far as a response program, right, we hear a lot about response, but incident response, network forensics, managed detection and response, right, for those who may not have a SOC or just like to have something as a service, especially with, the shortage within the cybersecurity industry. Understand cyber insurance. So I've consulted with quite a few customers that have been hit with ransomware, before and after. So we offered this workshop that I'll kind of get into before they were attacked and then after. And it's pretty much, it's rinse and repeat. There was a false pretense that, the actual ransomware or cyber insurance was, someone else's responsibility. And that they assumed that cyber insurance was going to take care of them, which is not the case, right? There's forensics, there's incident response. We could talk a little bit more about this in a more focal session. But once again, cyber insurance is just one piece of, and I wouldn't even consider part of a response. That's when you're ultimately paying up. And then understanding your data records and your classifications, because cyber insurance only covers, set amount of records. Gain a better understanding. So, Kaheen mentioned the NIST cybersecurity framework. It's one of the more popular frameworks out there, in addition to CIS top 20 or 18 that MK Palmore mentioned earlier. But as far as an architecture's perspective, NIST is kind of the security program that covers really the people, process, and the platform. MITRE ATT&CK Enterprise is a matrix that kind of walks you through. It's a more tactical focused framework that really talks about, attack detection evasion, right? So understanding, where you fit within the multiple matrices of MITRE really will help you understand on how these products, whether there's overlap, from an architecture perspective, really sets, what your security program should look like from a technology perspective. And then recovery is key for avoiding ransom data integrity and availability. Basically, what that means is encryption. Focus on data exfiltration as far as the main objective of an attack, right? It's not just recovery, right? It's really understanding the prevention all the way to response. Call to action. So, engage with C1. We've got information security consultants, DevSecOps. We've got myself on the technology, got Kaheen on the hacking side. We could provide a very structured focal area that covers 90 critical assets and critical areas and 12 underlying domains. It takes about 4 weeks. We'll provide a report on where your cybersecurity program sits to where we see the industry and a lot of our knowledge with that spans over multiple decades. So I'm gonna kick it back over to Chris, see if there's any Q&A.
No, and there was one question, I answered it. So I appreciate it, guys. Great job, as always. So with that said, we're gonna keep on running to make sure we adhere to our scheduled time, right? So up next, I'm gonna introduce Vito Nozza, who's our principal cybersecurity consultant. He's gonna talk about minimizing business risk and what that means, for you as part of your overall security program. So Vito, take it away.
Thank you, Chris. In a second, I just pop on my screen here.
There you go, sir. Looks good. Yep.
Thank you very much, Kaheen and Tarek. Great job there, Kaheen. It's always great to see. Everybody always talks about ransomware and the after effects, how much people paid, or I see a screen that says I'm encrypted, but nobody sees the beforehand, how it occurred, and I thought that was great. As Chris mentioned, my name is Vito Nozza. I'm the principal cybersecurity consultant for the national practice. I've been here for about 3 years at ConvergeOne, 20 plus years in the industry. I'd say about 15 years in security, auditing, assessing, creating programs for clients wrapped around not just from an IT or a technical perspective, but overall governance, risk, compliance perspective, which we'll talk about a little later on. Again, primarily governance, risk, compliance. Love talking about it. Risk, especially. I mean, I have 3 kids, 15, 10, and 5. I talk to them every day about social engineering risks, understanding the social media that you're on, and things like that. Because to me, if we educate our kids at an early age, then hopefully they'll be good security stewards going forward. Master of Science, Information Assurance, and Cybersecurity, specializing in healthcare, but also also financial, hospitality, health, and casinos as well. Currently, I'm a doctoral candidate, a research student, and love real-time threat analytics, especially in the IoT and ecosystem, which I feel right now from critical infrastructure is attacked, and that's a big threat vector in IoT. My wife calls me, certifiable, heavily certified in different ISACA, ISC2, and this is through the years working with different individuals throughout different stages of my career. So before I even start with the agenda, folks, critical infrastructure in the U.S. is under attack. Let's be honest. They talk about, I'm not going to go Hollywood on you, but look at, I think it was Die Hard 4, where it's all about the fire sale. But let's be honest, we're not going to be going through a fire sale here. That would be losing all 16 of our critical infrastructures from oil, energy, healthcare, financial, transportation. But I mean, the US has suffered 65,000 attacks in 2020. Of course, year of COVID. So that was quite the year. That's 7 attacks every hour. The latest, the DOE, Department of Energy, their subcontractor, a nuclear subcontract, was attacked by Rebel, ransomware as a service. It's as a service, it's a business. And it's easy for them. It's too easy to retrieve a program to attack a certain vertical. Airlines, and this is scary because a lot of us travel. Airlines are being attacked. Air India was attacked by the Chinese, Chinese-sponsored APT-41. So there you go. That's a supply chain attack. 26 million user logins were stolen from Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and eBay. So that's our private information. FBI ransomware hit 16 US healthcare networks. That's 290 organizations in the US. Healthcare, the biggest threat vector of healthcare is insurance and free insurance for individuals on the black market. Volkswagen, Audi, 3.3 million customer contacts, personal identifiable information. Who? From a third-party vendor. And last but not least, guys, or folks, is McDonald's Corporation was breached just recently in the US, South Korea, and Taiwan. And what did they take? Emails, phone numbers, and also addresses of individuals that they would distribute to. This was more like a reconnaissance attack for a future attack. So at the end of the day, it's almost like Sun Tzu said in The Art of War. Defense is the planning of an attack. Think about that. Unless you understand your ecosystem, unless you understand the information, the data, the assets that you have on-prem or in the cloud, how can you defend them properly? So let's go over an agenda here. ERM, Enterprise Risk Management. Isn't that just a risk management or risk assessment? Talk about compliance, security, and privacy. Frameworks, of course, critical assets, program creation, and then we'll just bring it all together. So enterprise risk management, isn't it just an extension of IT risk management? Well, people always think, oh, risk management is IT, but it's not. Understanding your entire enterprise and understanding where risks can lie. Remember, risks aren't just a bad thing. They're also opportunities. Anyone ever tell you, hey, come on, take a chance, take a risk? How about if we take an educated risk and understand the risk we're taking, and hopefully it will excel in our business outcomes. Anytime a company does a merger, does an acquisition, maybe brings in a new business unit, within its ecosystem, it's taking a risk. The risk is, will it succeed? Will it make our stakeholders happy? That is the risk that you're taking. But at the same time, you want to take an educated, you want to look into a risk analysis of what you're doing. So ERM really is a continuous process led by leadership across all the business units in the industry or in the company. It's really defined to identify and manage your current and emerging risks. Let's talk about emerging risks. Mobile computing. Stay at what's it called? Not stay at home, but work from home. COVID opened that up in 2020. A lot of companies weren't ready to relinquish their employees to go home and work from home. And that's when a lot of the attacks happened. Why? A new threat vector opened. We talk about IoT. IoT is the biggest thing for businesses. Why? Because it allows them to real-time decisions based on data and artificial intelligence that's collected. The problem is a lot of these IoT devices are inherently insecure. They're little devices that manufacturers want to push out. They're not computationally powerful enough to have any kind of encryption or hashing on them. So what happens? These are devices that attackers go after. We all heard about the fish tank in a casino, I believe in California, that had an IoT device on it that was a thermometer for the water in the fish tank. Well, every day it would send data that, yep, we're good. We haven't gone below or above our threshold for temperature. It was used to breach and collect all the, I guess they call them the whales, the big high rollers, information and exfiltrate it throughout that same media. So understanding the risks that you have within your industry is huge. What ERM is not, it's not a means to prevent all risk. If someone tells you that I'm completely risk-free, they're lying. You cannot avoid all risks. I recall an instance where an executive team asked me to present in front of a board. And after putting in the mitigation techniques that I believe in that financial vertical would help, one of the board members looked at me and said, so son, are you telling me that if we put all of these requirements or these recommendations in, that we'll be completely risk-free? So I looked at him, I said, well, you have to look at it this way. If you're a gazelle in the Serengeti and you wake up every day, you have two things in mind. One is to eat and one is not to be eaten. The not to be eaten part, you have to be faster than the slowest gazelle. Let's look at that from a cyber sense. We will make it so difficult because here's the thing, hackers are lazy. This ransomware as a service is an indication of that. They want to do things like the easy way. If you make it difficult for a hacker or a cyber criminal to breach your defenses, they'll get tired, they'll go on to the next person. And that's what really building a risk program is all about, to get to that security posture, that risk acceptance that you can accept, obviously, if you're breached. But if you're not, you make it so difficult that that the hacker will go to somebody else. So why enterprise risk management? And it all starts from the culture. It all starts, I know it's at the bottom of my list, culture and tone at the top. The tone at the top is no one in management is going to take you seriously unless executives have pushed their mandate down. So really answer risks associated questions. What can go wrong? How do we know? And that's the thing too. What can go wrong? Let's say we are breached. Do we even know that someone was in our environment doing reconnaissance prior to our breach? It's called dwell time. And Gartner has stated that dwell time is average 210 days. Could you imagine somebody being in your house, in your home, looking around at the windows, looking around at the doors, your vulnerabilities, your locks, your alarm system for 210 days and you're not even noticing that they're there? That's a problem. And that's something that needs to be looked into. How are risks being handled? So are we doing proper programs like disaster recovery programs, incident response programs? Are we doing tabletop exercises to understand that if a risk does occur, because odds are you'll probably get breached, how do we react to them? How do we ensure that our business continuity, that's all it's about, folks, is ensuring that your business continues to service its clients continues? Are there risks known? Are they classified? Are they actioned? Again, let's build a proper security posture that the executives can agree upon. So in the past, a lot of the business units within a company were segmented. They didn't talk to each other. If finance made a change within their, within their platform or their software, HR didn't know about it. Legal and compliance probably didn't know about it either, which could open up a risk. How about the external drivers? How about your competition? The regulations, the laws you need to follow. Were they being followed throughout every business unit within your industry, within your company? Internal drivers. Are we going to do an acquisition, a merger? Are we going to bring in a new business unit? If IT doesn't know about it, then there's an open threat vector there, because perhaps HR put a new platform in to elevate their business. If IT or legal wasn't involved, a threat or a risk could have evolved. So strategic risks, again, acquisition, to open up or to really open up our industry and be good in the competitive market, we need to purchase or we need to merge with other companies. What are the risks in doing that? Will that open up a plethora of threat vectors that cyber criminals can take advantage of? I recall being in a company where we merged or we acquired 5 different trust companies when I was with a big bank in Canada. And all 5 of these had different security postures. They had different platforms that we had to make sure were part of us, because if we didn't do that, of course, that was a threat vector and an opening to exfiltrate data. And unknown risks. This is a tough one. I mean, do we know the risks that we're possibly going to be attacked on? How about we do a proper risk analysis and we look at all the assets, the data, the information that we're housing that cyber criminals are really after, and how we can mitigate those risks. So business and risks, this is all it's about: strategy and objectives, risk identification, understanding what kind of risks that you're housing within your industry, within your ecosystem, risk assessment, and a risk response. How are you responding to these risks? If you have a ransomware and the site's down or the business is down, do you have the proper response mechanisms? Do you have a backup? Do you have DR as a service to make sure that you can get that data back up and continue business continuity? So the overarching principle: governance, are we doing the right things? Risk, what risk exists within my ecosystem? And compliance, to me, compliance is huge. Are we ensuring that we're following our regulatory, our standards, all our assessments and our audits? Because when an auditor comes in, they're going to ask, and if you're going to take anything away from this presentation, it's documentation. You can do as many programs as you can set up as many business continuity plans, disaster recovery plans, incident response plans, but unless they're documented that you're following them, then you're going to fail that audit, because that's the first thing that an auditor asks for, is documentation to prove that you're actually putting the proper controls in place, that you have the proper policies, and you have the proper programs to run your environment. So compliance, security, and privacy. I've had so many discussions with clients based on this, on why do I need to do a privacy program when I passed my HIPAA audit? Well, all you're doing is checking off boxes when doing compliance. That's all you're doing. An auditing body has certified that you're following a certain regulation. That does not mean that you are securing your data properly. You have to look at your risks throughout a complete gamut of compliance, security, and privacy. Compliance does not equal privacy, and security does not equal privacy. Privacy is on its own. You have to ensure that the data you're handling, let's say you're in retail, the data you're handling, which is client information, private, personal identifiable information, credit card information, are you keeping that data private? How's it being handled? Why are you housing it? Should you be housing it? In HIPAA, healthcare, you need to retain that data 50 years after the individual has passed away. So do you know that mandate? Do you have the capability to do that privately? And that's a big aspect. Frameworks. And this is huge. I mean, there's so many different frameworks that you can follow. Of course, Tarek mentioned the NIST and NIST cybersecurity framework. And then this cybersecurity framework was really 5 functions. And those 5 functions of identify, protect, detect, respond, and of course, restore are key to understanding how we do a complete security program. And you know, the big thing now, the big scare throughout the industries is supply chain management. So much so that in 2020, the NIST cybersecurity framework added a 23rd control, and that control is supply chain management, because it's not about how strong your security program is, but it's about the weakest link in the chain. And we've seen a lot of attacks where supply chain, third party are the actual victim, but then affects your information. The NIST 853. The NIST 853 is really, it's a very specific, whereas NIST cybersecurity framework is very cyclical, and you can work and you know, I guess modify it. 853 has 20 families of controls that you can pick and choose to help your risk analysis or your risk assessments. If you're weak in identity access management, if you're weak in physical management, or perhaps you're weak in cloud management, NIST 853 will help you specifically to those controls. PCI DSS, I mean, do you know that this is the most frequently used framework in the US? Well, of course it is. It's retail. And the credit card companies, they're very vigilant in ensuring that you're following their standard or their regulation, because they want you to make sure that that data is being kept secure. And they don't want to have egg on their face, oh, Visa was breached or MasterCard was breached. And PCI is so irrelevant now that although it's a self-certification, 3 states, Washington, Minnesota, and of course Nevada, have made it a law. And that's the thing about frameworks and privacy, is understand if you're working nationally or if you're working abroad, the local, the national, and global laws that exist, because they change all the time. I mean, we have GDPR for privacy, and that's like the granddaddy of privacy laws. And of course, California has CCPA, the California Customer Privacy Act. But how about Virginia now? They added one. It's just as stringent as California's. So as we speak, new states are making new laws. So you have to understand what you are liable for. Again, an external driver. Critical assets. I'm asked so many times, you know, Vito, how do we? I want to build a data loss prevention program. And my question is, well, do you have data classification set up? And more than half are like, no, we don't. Well, how can you protect data that you don't even know exists, or you don't even know is in a certain class? I've seen so many clients spend a lot of money on controls to protect public information. Think about that, folks. You're spending money on information that is marketing material, or it's really a contact information that's already out. It's public. There's internal, confidential, and restricted. So at the end of the day, understand the class of data that you're housing, because restricted and confidential will definitely be under a privacy law, and handling that information is key. So the program creation. Why are we doing all this? I mean, we all know about the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And that's what it's all about. If you're missing one of those aspects, then you failed in information security and building your program. I mean, I know we're talking about, like, let's say manufacturing. They're really concerned about availability, being up, ensuring that the product is created properly. But nowadays, because of IoT and ITOT, integrity and confidentiality is also high on their list. They're using IoT devices to run these machines, but these IoT devices have to stay secure, because if they don't, they might be fed the wrong information. And we all know about Stuxnet. I mean, that was a big cluster where IoT or IT was attacked, and the OT didn't know what was going on. And that's something that we need to understand, is keeping our data confidential, having integrity within our data, and the availability. Imagine in a hospital environment where individuals are collecting data off of IoT devices, and it's going into a big data pool. And maybe 1% of this data is used for research. Can you imagine if the integrity of that data was altered and the research is being conducted on erroneous information? The ramifications are huge. There was a general a Joint Chief of Staff under the Obama era that stated, we are no longer in a physical war. It's called hybrid warfare because physical and cyber will come and merge. Cyber will now affect physical. And we've heard about it in the news where healthcare hospitals or hospital agencies have gone down. They can't service their clients or their patients. They're moving patients to other hospitals, and individuals are passing away from the transfer because they couldn't make the trip. That's where physical is now being affected. So the road to security and privacy. Strategy. What is your strategy? Remember, folks, it's not about, I'm going to put all sorts of controls in place. It has to follow your business objectives. The board, executives, they're not going to sign off on $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, building a material or a SAL if they don't understand how it is benefiting their business outcome. And that's all it's all about. I mean, identify. How do you categorize your assets and risks to your business? Do you know how you're possibly going to be attacked? And when you do, can you respond to it? Protecting it, proper treatment of these safeguards. Don't just put controls in, haphazard. Make sure these controls are doing the job and monitor. We talked about dwell time. Make sure that you have a proper managed detection response or even a proper SIM in place that can monitor. And I don't call it continuously monitoring. I call it continuously auditing. It's always looking at the changes, the anomalies, the threats within your environment. Because remember, we can't do it all. Why don't we use artificial intelligence to look at our infrastructure, not only on-prem, but also in the cloud? And I won't be talking about cloud programs because I know my esteemed colleagues, Mike Mahurin and Sopat Chevs will be talking about that next. But then responding. Do we have the proper controls in place and the programs to respond to these breaches? Do we have an incident response plan in place? Do we have the proper business unit leaders understanding their roles and responsibilities? Are we a public company? Do we have access to law enforcement, both local and federal? Do we have a good public relation individual that can talk to individuals outside of the company to let them know what's going on? Now let's bring it all together. I know this is a big eye chart. However, look at the governance, look at management, and all these pieces can be their own program within an overall enterprise risk management program. Context and leadership, understanding the business outcome requirements, evaluation and direction. What are our security policies? Do we have a security strategy and communication in place? Remember, executives want to know what's going on at all times, whether we've had an incident or we're just doing regular, normal daily security. Compliance, auditing, and reviewing. Make sure you know what compliance factors you need to be part of. Are you assessing it properly? Are you doing annual risk assessments or annual vulnerability assessments? Because when the auditors come in, they're going to want to see these reports to make sure that the controls you have in place are in fact mitigating risks to your security posture. And then of course, management, prevention, identity and access management, making sure people have a proper, proper privilege level. They're not given, more information or more programs than they need to do their job. Segregation of duties, that's key. You don't want to have an individual who writes the check and also cashes it. So that's a policy that you could put in and a control as well. We talk about HR security, change and support, and that's huge. Vendor management awareness, understanding what your vendors are doing. So many clients say, well, I'm now in the cloud and the data's in the cloud, so my accountability or my responsibility is lessened. No, it's actually heightened, because when people get breached, it's never the cloud companies that you hear in the newspaper. It's always the company that was breached. So it's your responsibility. Detection, as I mentioned, make sure you have visibility within your environment. If you don't have visibility, how do you know what's going on? And if you don't have visibility on your premises, imagine how dangerous it is not to have visibility within the cloud. And before I leave it here, measurements, metrics, put some key risk indicators in, some thresholds. Make sure that data isn't going above that threshold. I mean, make sure like look at the thermostat in the casino. It was doing 100K of data every day. All of a sudden, for 2 or 3 days, it's doing 100 meg of data. Did you know that? Did you see that? Maybe key risk indicators weren't connected. So to end it off here, folks, security lifecycle services. We have a great tool set here to discuss not only the NIST frameworks to help you with 24/7 threat monitoring, gap assessments. That's huge. I mean, you're currently in this state here. You want to get to a target state. There are gaps that you need to fill. We could do PCI gap assessments. We could do HIPAA gap assessments that they mirror up to perhaps a NIST cybersecurity framework or 853, or perhaps an ISO 27001, which is a global standard. Again, we have advisory services, but key here is creating the security program. Unless you know what to create, unless you know what to defend against, then how can you possibly put the right controls in place? So having a business continuity plan, having a disaster recovery plan, and an incident response plan. We've helped so many clients to create incident response plans, do tabletop exercises, even have incident response retainers that, in 1 hour, we already understand that it is an incident. It actually is an event that is occurring. We can quarantine that, eradicate it, and get you back up and running. And I don't know, Chris, are there any questions on that one? But
there's not, but I appreciate we're right on time. If you do have a question for Vito, please put it in the chat. We can answer it during the next session if you do have one. So I'll just keep us on time. I appreciate you being on time too. Great presentation as always.
Thank you.
So we're gonna kick it over to Mike Mahiran and Sopat Chev. They're gonna talk about really 5 pitfalls in securing cloud, but it's going to be more along the lines of whether it's GRC and security controls. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys. Take it away.
All right, thanks, Chris. I appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. We're going to be talking about 5 pitfalls in security that we see, and we're going to look at it from both a governance, risk, and compliance perspective, but also a technical perspective as well. I'm Mike Mahiran. I'm a senior solutions architect with ConvergeOne. I focus on advanced enterprise security architectures and making sure that we tie in people, process, and technologies into our solutions for my customers. I've had over 20 years of experience in enterprise security architecture with a focus in governance, risk, and compliance, offensive security, technical architecture, and security program development. I'm joined by Sopat Chev, who's our senior practice lead for ConvergeOne for SecDevOps. He's had over 20 years experience in the cybersecurity industry as well, and he's the content creator of 5 Minutes of Security on LinkedIn. So when we start looking at major pitfalls in securing the cloud, we wanted to really bring you some of the lessons learned that we've seen with our customers in the field as they've went on their cloud journey, whether that journey is software as a service or infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. We wanted to share some of the lessons that we've learned and help you avoid some of those pitfalls and provide help where we can in those areas. We'll go through each of these 5 items as we move forward and kind of go into detail of what each of these mean and some of the things to keep in mind as you move forward with your cloud journey. We'll start with the 5 pitfalls of governance, risk, and compliance. When I talk about governance, risk, and compliance in the cloud, I want to set a few distinctions. One of the things we see in governance is really that's how are we setting the rules of the road for the cloud and how it's managed? Who's responsible for what? That changes from traditional security because we have multiple more dimensions now around governance. We have to look at who's paying for this, who's managing equipment sprawl, who's responsible for legal aspects, who's responsible for integrating development and dev operations in. And then we need to look at it and how can we use cloud's capabilities, native technologies, and the functions around a modern cloud architecture to actually enhance our security program. If we take advantage of the technologies that we have in the cloud, we can dramatically increase our security, decrease our cost, and make our organization operate much more effectively. We can also do the opposite if we don't do this correctly. When we start moving toward risk, we want to look at things of accurately assessing cloud risk. We see a tendency for people to either say cloud is more secure and not attribute where risk belongs, whether that's with the provider or the customer. And then we also see customers who ignore risks. So what we want to do is figure out how we can leverage cloud technologies to reduce the organization's risk and create an overall better environment and a less risk-focused environment in the organization. We then want to look at compliance. How does being in the cloud affect our regulatory and compliance requirements? Is there legal restrictions about where our data is stored? Is there legal restrictions about multi-tenancy? And then once we've identified regulatory and risk requirements, we have to have some fundamental changes in cloud auditing and our audit program to be able to prove to regulators that we're doing the things that we said and we need to do inside the cloud. So all of these items, when we talk GRC, are things that we really want to focus on the cloud that's different than our traditional information and security programs that we may have been used to with on-premise environments. So the first thing that we see that when we look at cloud environments is a lack of putting a GRC framework in place. Really what happens is cloud technology introduces legal, business, and operational elements that fundamentally change the way we run our business. And we need to make sure that we are identifying risk and identifying those things and addressing them in a way that helps the business perform and avoid loss and minimizes risk. When we look at cloud technology, a large majority of the risk associated with it isn't even technical risks. We look at big items like legal e-discovery, contracts and SLAs with the vendors. Another thing to keep in mind, especially with software as a service, is we identify those technologies that revolutionize our business. It's really easy to get information inside those applications, whether it's a trading application that predicts risk in the market or a medical imaging application that we're getting as a SaaS service. But what happens is we often don't consider what happens if something happens to that vendor. What if that vendor's lost? What if they double our price of our service? How does that actually affect our business? What we like to look at is the Cloud Security Alliance standards. When we look through these items, they provide 14 different areas that we should look at in order to build a security program that supports the cloud environment and minimizes risk. And I highly encourage everyone to take a look at it. It's free to access. The Cloud Security Alliance Security Guidance version 4.0 is the current version, and we use that when we assist our customers in developing a security architecture. But it really goes a long way to addressing a lot of the non-technical risk that affects your cloud journey and something all organizations should do. The second area that we look at is when people treat infrastructure as a service cloud offerings as a offsite data center and not a cloud environment. What this typically looks like, and we've seen a lot of customers that have failed with cloud because they'll just go and forklift all their virtual machines from their on-premise environment, drop it into a cloud environment and call it cloud transformation. And that's not really cloud transformation. When we start looking at the power of cloud, automation, infrastructure as code, and native cloud tools are really key elements that we have to look at from a cloud technology perspective to really take full advantage of the cloud. What we want to look at is automating, standardizing, and developing consistency to reduce risk. What happens is when we embrace a true cloud architecture, we unlock data from services so that servers are independent and they provide specific services on data. And we use automation to spin those instances up, spin them down, secure them, apply templates. And what we're doing is standardizing and automating. And as we standardize and automate, that's going to reduce a tremendous number of vulnerabilities that we typically see in configuration, patching, security software configuration, compliance hardening, and all of those things, which are the vulnerabilities that hackers exploit to introduce ransomware and other attacks into the infrastructure. By having an automated, consistent interface, and having that ability to have things automated, we remove a lot of that human element and that inconsistency. We also build a foundation where we can build a platform to drive security automation. When you have standardization and automation and orchestration in place, you can start integrating your security tools to provide automated response that moves at the speed of threats. What we really want to get to a point of is where an automated system identifies that there is an issue or an incident with a piece of software or a service, and then automatically goes and fixes it in real time without having to go through the chain of a human operator, but does it in such a way that it doesn't negatively impact the organization. It's highly predictable and works well. What we recommend for our customers is developing a comprehensive cloud security architecture strategy, and then go through and integrate that into the security program as a risk reduction mechanism. When we look at it, and the graphic shows this, we move into a situation where we want to architect the solution be able to automatically provision and operate. What we'll see is a dramatic increase in time and architecture, but that'll be coupled with dramatic drops in provisioning time and operations time, which will overall foster a more secure and a more effective environment. The third thing that we frequently see is a failure to retrain IT staff and security staff in the relevant technologies that are related to cloud. Cloud is a little bit unique in that there's a lot of different skill sets across a lot of different disciplines, ranging from networking, data center, scripting, software development, DevOps, security DevOps. All of those areas come into play, and getting that right combination of skills has been a challenge for most organizations. When we look at Gartner, about 61% of enterprises identify that lack of having DevOps and cloud skills is a major is a major risk that's preventing them from achieving their goals of becoming cloud native and and implementing cloud transformations. What we really need to do is make sure people are trained in the new architectures and the approaches needed to prevent security issues, best practices to build security. And we also need to realize that traditional concepts where we might tell someone to go read a book about the latest firewall, or we might tell someone to go learn a specific piece of point technology on their own, might not be effective in the cloud environment because it covers such a wide area. To solve this problem, we recommend developing a strong staff training program. One good resource that we found with a lot of customers is the SANS Institute has a very effective cloud security curriculum, where they break down the different roles that we find for a native cloud in a native cloud environment, whether that's the DevOps architect, DevOps professional, the cloud security analyst who's monitoring activity, the architect who's designing the interaction between logical systems components and their integrated security, and the managers who manage those instances. Developing that out and using an established training curriculum will help you achieve faster adoption of cloud, reduce the number of errors, and then dramatically reduce the likelihood of implementing a security issue in the environment that can compromise your cloud environment and your overall data integrity. The next thing that we see is businesses failing to integrate their DR and business continuity plans with the cloud. We can see that last week with the Fastly outage causing multiple outages for major websites going offline. What we really want to do is look at cloud from a perspective of identifying what things in the cloud could cause business continuity issues, whether that's dependency on multiple cloud services or multiple integrated technologies, but then also look at it from the perspective of cloud gives us a tremendous opportunity to be able to have high availability and redundancy. Once we've done things like implemented infrastructure as code, where we've programmatically implemented our environment, it makes it easy to move it between different availability zones, different cloud providers, completely different geographies, so that we can build very robust disaster recovery plans. It's also a double-edged sword in that if we don't look at and identify where we have dependencies in place, we can have a major business impacting event without realizing it. So what we really push our customers to do is when they're building their business impact assessments for their cloud resources, that they're integrating and truly understanding the impact of cloud technologies and cloud integration points so that they can optimize their capability to recover from disaster and then prevent situations where cloud outages that are out of their control cause massive negative impact. Finally, one of the biggest things that we see from a pitfall perspective is people viewing cloud as a higher or lower risk than traditional on-premise technology. It's a very large misconception that cloud is inherently less secure. If we look at Accenture, they created a major data loss just simply by putting the wrong permissions on their S3 buckets. But then on the flip side, we can look at AWS having a secret zone that is handling military classified information on a daily basis and workloads and services that are handling classified material that any customer would be challenged to be able to build those security controls in their environment. Where we approach cloud security from is it's like any other IT environment. It's really going to be as secure as the knowledge of your teams, the solidness of your information security program and the solidness of your architecture design and your implementation of tools in order to manage that environment. We really encourage people to develop a cloud security program by implementing strong GRC standards and technical standards, and then creating strong alignment between people, processes, and technology with a heavy focus on those tools and frameworks that modern cloud technology provides. So with those, I'm going to turn the conversation over to Sopat to go into securing cloud assets.
How's that? Can you guys hear me now? Is that good?
There we go. Much better.
I'm glad somebody stopped me. I would have kept going on and on and on.
It's all good.
All right. So as I was saying really quick, the format of Mike and I's presentation is really to give kind of a high level, the problem statement, kind of address narrative, and then at the end of it, give you guys some things that you can go back and absolutely do some research on. So we're kind of helping to identify kind of the areas where you want to maybe spend some targeted attention towards. So I want to start this with maybe just a couple of high level stats. So 61% of businesses have migrating their workloads to the cloud. Let me move this here in 2020. And I think the idea here is that, it's pretty synonymous that most organizations are already understanding some sense of value in moving their workloads to a public provider. So with that being said, by 2024, it is projected that over 14% of overall IT spend globally will be cloud, which basically says a lot when we're looking at budgeting expectations. Right, cloud is now a line item in that factor. 2018, 2019, of all of and these are public data breaches that have been reported, again public, over 196 were primarily caused by cloud misconfigurations. And you're going to find that in a lot of, I would probably say, forums or blogs or even write-ups that are, out in social media, et cetera. We're going to touch on a little bit of that, but I do want to touch on some other things that I think used to be big in 2016, 2017 are still super relevant even now in 2021. So some things that have kind of dropped off the radar slightly. And then data breaches targeting cloud-based infrastructures. Okay, let me move this here. Those have increased by 50% in 2019 as more businesses are now shifting their confidential data into the cloud. And I think there is a bit of a journey there. Customers that have now are on their either first or second leg of cloud adoption are starting to realize certain things. Maybe private data needs to be held back at their own private DC. And so you see this phenomenon of a hybrid environment. And so those are things that we'll address and kind of leading into the pitfalls. Number one, lack of patch management, which should be no surprise whatsoever. 50% of businesses are running at least a minimum of one outdated server. There's a lot of reasons why, but it seems like majority of it is, again, based on providers' responsibility. So there's an assumption there that providers are taking on what predominantly is going to be the end user's responsibility, the consumers. And so every provider is a little bit different, whether it's AWS, GCP, Azure, or any of the others. And so it's really important to understand that responsibility matrix to understand your part in that partnership. So a couple of things that you can look at, you can absolutely Google search these terms. You will find these documents, I promise you. For AWS, look up AWS System Manager, Patch Manager. It is a document, very, very useful. For Azure, manage updates and patches, and that's exactly what you would type out on a Google search. It is an end user documentation guide, so it's pretty extensive. Goes into deployment. It is a deployment guideline is what I'm trying to say. And for GCP, OS Patch Management. So all these are specific guides that you can download off of the web. Number two, controlling of unmanaged servers. 10 million servers across the world are unmanaged and improperly validated. And I think a big part of this is due to the fact that there is some neglect to low risk workloads. And so, we talk a lot about, CI/CD pipeline or the build process. Well, there are workloads that only have one function or serve one purpose. But when you're looking at something like serving that workload up in AWS, it is going to acquire an EBS volume data store. And so with that being said, even if you spin down that workload, unfortunately, if you didn't set the rights to also kill the storage environment, it is a low task storage, which means that you will receive incremental costs. And so those are things that you want to look for, right? There is a cloud health check by VMware. Now, this is a tool that allows you to run automated scripts and look into your cloud infrastructure and identify what I would call kind of these low task workloads. So something to take a look at. If you're not familiar with them, again, you can Google search these terminologies. Number 3, lack of access control. There's a fun one. So 70% of businesses don't implement proper access management to their cloud infrastructure. So I think the key here is, not understanding what data is of risk. Now, there's a lot of context here, but what I would say is, number one, starting off with understanding where all your data resides is the first place you would want to start. A lot of organizations still, those are kind of the beginning stages. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to really get a lot better at that. And then number 2, once you understand where data resides, is understanding what data is considered of high risk or high value to you. Now, what that does create moving forward is your ability to start looking at strategies like identity and access management. And so on your screen here, there's a couple of different options. Single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, privilege access management, which seems to be in the news quite a bit when you're looking at elevated privilege attacks. So Google searches, I would look up for AWS, AWS Identity and Access Management. This is a documentation, again, Azure Cloud IAM, simple as that. And then for GCP, just simply look up GCP IAM documentation. So they're pretty extensive. They talk quite a bit about their functionality. And keep in mind, it's going to be a little bit different for each one of these providers, right? So it's important to really understand what they do and what they don't do, especially you have native controls if you're already leveraging some form of IAM solution in-house. Number 4, insufficient encryption. Now, the point that I would like to make here, and let me touch on the tagline, so less than 30% of businesses implementing proper full disk encryption. Now, I think the key takeaway here is that it's not so much about are we using proper, cryptography technology, or is it a question of our PKI environment? It's more of a question of, do we understand proper data classification, right? And again, this goes back to slide 3, which is, do we understand what data is considered sensitive? And so there's a couple ways that we can address answering those questions and some solutions for you. Number 1, a partner of ours, this is a manufacturer that we partner with heavily, which is Varonis. They do offer a free data risk assessment that will actually go out and help you to identify your sensitive data, location, and also really give you some, what I would say, high level and also tactical things that you can walk away with in terms of recommendations on how to remediate. For AWS, server-side encryption behavior is a document. For Azure, there's a really extensive article that's out, and it's literally just the way that I typed it out here: storage, data, and encryption for Azure. And then for GCP, encrypting secrets at the application layer. So again, useful documents, flash articles for you to take a look at. And then finally, maintaining sensitive, unused data. 50% of businesses do not eliminate sensitive data that is no longer in use. So this kind of goes right back 360 into the first point that was made earlier. When you're spinning down workloads, the question is, does the data store still reside? So those are things you do want to audit, you want to ask yourself that. And a lot of times, some of these workloads, unfortunately, will maintain sensitive data. And so when you're talking about workloads that you don't have any attention on because it's not part of overall operations or expected to be anymore, those become kind of low and slow targets, if you will, that are pretty much under the radar. And so a couple things that you can take a look at to kind of become a little bit more aware in terms of how to address that. For AWS, delete user data in AWS Data Lake. This is an extensive article. Azure, delete data retention policy. This is a document. And then for GCP, data deletion in GCP. So these are all documents that you guys can download and gain some more information on. So with that said, really quick in summary, a couple of things, right? So focusing on building a patch management program. Now, not to be confused with vulnerability scanning, which is a function within a patch management program. So a program that's extremely extensive. It's a combination of the tools, the resources that are going to be responsible for managing the tools and the processes in carrying out where you are remediating and then coming back and doing things like rescanning, et cetera. So really important to have a program in place, not just a product. Identifying all servers and managing their life cycle. So from inception to termination, super important to have control over that. Number 3, implementing identity access management. Really not much to say there. I think that's pretty synonymous with what the industry tells you. proper encryption standards, and I think the last one, super important, is understanding where residual data that is unused resides. Next steps in terms of what we can offer here, we do engage with our customers heavily in providing what we call a waves engagement, and this allows us to really sit down with you strategically as well as tactically to really understand both your footprints and identify areas of gaps. We do heavily make recommendations, and we tailor this to your language specifically, so we are speaking your business context. And with that in mind, this is our contact information. Should you want to reach out to us directly, email is best. And hand it over to you, Chris, if there's no questions.
All right. So does anyone, we'll pause for a little bit here. We're actually on time, so I appreciate the being on time, guys, and great presentation as always. Thanks to Mike and Sopat. Is there any questions? If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A. That'll be really handy as we go into our whiskey tasting here in about 15 minutes. So if you do have a question for our whiskey enthusiast, Tom Fisher, definitely think about it and put it in the Q&A. Let's just pause here and see if there's any questions for Sopat and Mike. All right, we'll give it a minute here. Let me share my screen while we're. All right. All right. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. So we've got a couple of minutes before our Tom Fisher comes on for the whiskey tasting, but we wanted to really discuss with you a really kind of important topic that's really foundational to a really good security program, and it's one of the pillars of the NIST CSF framework that we've discussed a lot today through multiple different presentations with that. And so one of the things that we're going to talk about here is the cyber recovery we're going to spend probably about 5-10 minutes talking about that. And with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Hassan Kasic. He's our national practice director for our data center and cloud practice. And he's going to walk you through the next couple of slides.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. You can hear me well?
I can hear you just fine. Looking good too,
Awesome.
by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for putting me between the whiskey tasting and the audience. And
no,
guys, I'm going to make
good.
it quick. Awesome. I'm going to make it quick. I only have 3 slides. I should be done in like 5-6 minutes max. So couple of things. If we can move to the next slide, Chris, thank you. So something to think about, and this is based on a recent survey from Sophos. This has just been published last April, just 2 months ago, and this is the state of ransomware. And it's based on 5,400 IT decision makers in 30 countries. And what's the first thing interesting is the average cost of ransomware recovery now went up to 1.85 million per attack. This includes the overall cost of downtime, people time, device cost, network cost, the lost opportunity, ransom paid. And this was just $761 a year ago. So it's more than double just in 1 year. And we expect that this is, just going to continue to go up. Second thing is that we have seen an uptick of customers that end up paying the ransom. 56% of customers who got attacked reported that they paid the ransom. That's a big percentage. And the last thing is, even when you pay the ransom, don't expect to recover 100% of your data. Only 8% of the businesses that paid the ransom recovered 100% of their data. 92% paid the ransom and reported that they lost some data. So keep that in mind. So just to sum it up, the cost of recovery keeps going up. The percentage of customers that end up paying the ransom is high. And even when the ransom gets paid, don't expect to recover 100% of your data. So what do? Next slide, Chris, please. So the answer is you need a cyber recovery solution. And cyber recovery solutions are quickly becoming a core component of any IT environment. It's becoming the DR of ransomware. The same way we use DR site and technologies to recover from natural disasters and systems outages, we use cyber recovery solutions to recover from cyber attacks and specifically ransomware. So a cyber recovery solution will have a data vault that's used to save and protect your backup data. And it also includes a recovery environment, which is a data center stack that is protected and ready to temporarily host your mission critical applications while you go through the cleaning process and bringing back your production environment. So what's the design principles and key characteristics of a cyber recovery solution? First, the backup data has to be immutable with retention locking, meaning it cannot be changed, modified, or deleted by anyone, period. Second, isolated and air-gapped, meaning the backup data is stored offline and completely isolated from the production environment. Advanced cyber recovery solutions accomplish this by using advanced security controls and technologies like data diodes that will only allow backup traffic to flow in one direction, and network ports will only be enabled during the backup window. Third, threat intelligence and analytics. This is adding an extra layer of protection that examines the inside of the files and databases to understand how they change over time. This will provide a continuous monitoring of data integrity and will send immediate alerts when changes occur that are related to cyber attacks. And last, rapid restore. One of the most important things in a ransomware attack is how fast can you recover. And in a ransomware situation, it's more complicated than a traditional disaster recovery situation because you have to go through the ransomware forensic process, assess all your damages, root cause, entry points, kinds of attack, etc. And once you are done, you have to wipe out all exposed systems, whether encrypted or not. And then you will have to, once you do all that, then you will have the green light to start your restore and recovery process. So this takes a long time, and in a big environment, you are actually talking about weeks, not days. So what's becoming a core component in a cyber recovery solution is building a separate recovery environment that's part of your data vault that will allow you to quickly recover your mission critical applications to last known good backup while the investigation is still ongoing. Last slide, Chris. So at ConvergeOne, we've been helping hundreds of our customers with data protection and cyber recovery solutions. I actually have a cyber recovery practice in my organization, and that team is just focused on cyber recovery and data protection, and that's what they do all day, every day. So just recently, that team actually was awarded the Dell Technologies National Award for cyber recovery for all the great work they have been doing to our community. And this customer is a good example of this. This is a large school district based in California that deployed, ConvergeOne cyber recovery solution. And just a few weeks after we finished the deployment, they were hit with a massive ransomware attack. The whole environment was encrypted. Law enforcement and forensic team immediately got engaged. They assessed the whole environment, including the cyber recovery solution, and they confirmed to us that the backup data was intact. So once we were given the green light, we were able to recover the whole environment in just a few days and quickly reinstated online learning. So this is a good real life example that if you have the right cyber recovery solution in place, yes, you can minimize downtime. Yes, you can minimize disruption. And yes, you can recover without the need to pay the ransom. Thank you all. Chris, back to you.
All right. Thanks, Hassan. Appreciate it. So I just want to kind of wrap up and do a little closing here before we get to Tom Fisher here, who actually is joining us. So all right, so we can I'm gonna run through a couple things here real quick before we get to our whiskey tasting. So one of the things I just want to make sure, one of the reasons why I want to make sure we understand kind of what we do. One of the leading things we do from a go-to-market strategy is we have what's known as a waves assessment. And waves is a ConvergeOne methodology that allows us to come in and really assess a customer security program to see where they stand as part of in the industry best practices. We look at things, our questionnaire and our assessment methodology is mapped to, NIST CSF, CIS top 20, COBOL, ISO 27001. So we come in there and we ask very specific questions around all sorts of things like, security awareness training. It could be, edge infrastructure. It could be, DNS security. There's over 90 different, there's over like 100 different questions, but we really focus on 12 different domains where we're going to target it. And this is an assessment that we do for our customers as part of, their investment in partnership. And we've, as you can see here, we've done over 750 plus waves engagements, and we've noticed, have 500,000 malware instances observed as part of these assessments. So we have a dedicated team that goes in there and we'll run these assessments for you. I mean, really from a deliverable as part of this assessment is you get you get a nice deliverable that gives you kind of a list of all the things that could be things that you're doing well, and it could be some deficiencies that we've noticed as part of our assessment. So we go in and make sure that you're really attuned to what's going on in the cybersecurity industry. And then one of the other offers that we have with ConvergeOne here is a cloud security virtual briefing. So this is a 90-minute briefing where we would set up with the customer, where we'd come in and talk about these 6 domains here listed on the right on the right side of the slide, where we'll help provide thought leadership around the cloud security landscape, things like the shared responsibility model, security first approach, and cloud security architecture. So I did, this is something that we offer our customers free of charge to as well. So it's definitely something we can help if you're in public cloud infrastructure. This is a really good kind of next step to help, provide really good thought leadership for you as part of your journey into the public cloud. So the one we're giving away Oculuses for the first 30 customers that complete a briefing or assessment. So what we're doing, we're sending out a link to register as after the event concludes today. So one of the ways that you can take advantage of that, was why we talked a little bit about kind of a waves engagement from a cybersecurity or completing a virtual cloud security briefing. So you have to complete those in order to get the Oculus, and we'll send that to the main customer point of contact who schedules the briefing for us. So with that said, I know we're kind of ahead of schedule. So with that said, I am going to introduce Tom Fisher, who is the founder of Bourbon Blog. So Bourbon Blog is Tom is a bourbon expert and founder of, like I said, Bourbon Blog. It's the #1 online resource for bourbon. One I think is a really interesting tidbit is Tom's been recognized by the governor of the Commonwealth of Kentucky with the honor of a Kentucky colonel. So I thought that was very interesting. Tom also judges spirits and cocktail competitions such as the Denver International Spirits Competition, American Crafts Distiller Association, and the Breckenridge Craft Spirits Competition, and many others. Before I turn it over to Tom, I just want to say a very big thank you to all of our customers that spent their time with us today. Especially, I want to ounce of appreciation for Colleen Hall and Chelsea Jones from our marketing department. They worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make sure that this event went out without a hitch, and for that I thank you very much. And for our cybersecurity team, they put in a lot of time and effort to make sure our presentations were top notch. And to Tim Vemster, our vice president of digital infrastructure, who helped provide some really good oversight as part of the overall event. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Tom, and you can take it away, Tom.
Well, thanks so much, Chris, and for all those joining, friends of ConvergeOne. Thanks so much, Chris. I know you have some great distilleries there in Kansas. I understand you have one of your favorite bottles in front of you.
I do. This is from J. Rieger and Company. It's a Kansas City whiskey. It's a local craft distillery, and it's one of my favorite places to go have a drink with family and friends.
Excellent. Oh, that's great. Well, I can't wait to have a whiskey with you there in Kansas City. And, I'm a fan of J. Rieger as well. And so many distilleries that have come up over the last 10, 20 years. There's been such a resurgence of bourbon and American whiskey and spirits in general. And that's what we're going to dive in today. We're going to taste some bourbon, but you see in your kits, you also have some other interesting whiskeys. So I always like to curate a collection which will help us really understand a variety of whiskeys. Back before 2000, well, back before 1919, at when Prohibition happened, there was something like 5,000 distilleries, right? And all of those, can you imagine 5,000 distilleries in the US? So many of those got killed off by Prohibition. Only a handful survived. And then we come into 1933 out of Prohibition. It took us up until 2001 to have 100 distilleries. And around 10 years from there, really the bourbon boom started happening. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and tell you what the first bourbon we're going to try is. It's that Breckenridge bourbon. And I'm going to bring up a presentation for you. We're going to talk about these whiskeys a little bit, and then we're really going to dive into them. All right. So just a little bit about me. In case you want to find me later, email me at any time. I'm going to be answering some questions. Chris is going to be fielding some questions there towards the end. But if you think of something later you want to ask me about, always feel free to email me, tom@bourbonblog.com. You're also invited to find us on whatever it is you use, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. We always do a lot of great YouTube videos. Later tonight, I'll be interviewing a distiller. And there's the link to our podcast as well. But all you got to do is send an email, tell me you are part of the ConvergeOne tasting, and it'll be my pleasure to help guide you with whiskeys, because we really love everything ConvergeOne does with us. So a little bit about me. My background's in TV and radio. And part of how I got my start in bourbon was sort of by accident. I had been working with the actress that played Marianne on Gilligan's Island, Dawn Wells, and the comedian Steve Martin, and I helped them start a film festival in Idaho about 16 years ago called Spudfest. Unfortunately, Dawn died at the end of last year, but quite an amazing woman. There was a picture of a tasting that she helped me host several years ago in Hollywood. But you know, wherever it may be, no matter what kind of tasting I'm doing, it's always a pleasure to bring great people together for these sorts of tastings. We do a lot of tastings for charity. I did an event, charity event last year where CeeLo Green was a part of it. I'm going to go ahead and have you, I think you should already have this link. This is the tasting wheel. And if you don't already have this, it's easy to find. I'll refer back to it. It's just at bourbonblog.com/wheel. We're going to take you through the tastings. Go ahead and pour a little of that Breckenridge. I'm going to talk about all of them a little bit, but then we're going to go back to a deep dive of all of them. But that's a tasting wheel that I created to really help you, you know, get your head around the flavors. There's the picture of, I was going to find it a moment ago. There's the picture of me pouring some Kentucky Owl bourbon for CeeLo Green. We raised a lot of great money for this this charity we were doing some work for shortly before the pandemic. All right, so what is bourbon, you may ask? Well, bourbon is a type of whiskey. If the umbrella is whiskey, the general umbrella is whiskey, bourbon's just one of the many types of whiskeys underneath that. There's tons. There's Scotch, there's Irish, but there's a few things that bourbon has to be called bourbon. Has to be at least 51% or more corn. Has to be aged in a new charred oak barrel. And I happen to have, I'll show you, I'm up on the side screen here. I happen to have a barrel stave with me. This is new charred oak. So it takes about 35 of these to make a full barrel. And that char is so deep, so black, the flame hits it. And I'll show you a video here in a few minutes, but it's part of the magic of the barrel, the bourbon swimming in and out of that barrel as it's in the barrel for 4 or 5 years, that makes it so special. Of course, it has to be made in the USA. It can be made in any state. Every state has at least a few bourbons, if not a whole bunch. Alaska happens to have one, and it's actually quite good. The only thing you can add to bourbon when you empty it out of the barrel is water to proof it down. Now you may say, well, I've seen these peanut butter flavored bourbons and cherry, and yes, those are not typically considered straight bourbons. They have their place. They're kind of like bottled cocktails, but they're flavored bourbons. The only thing you can really add to a bourbon is water. The entry point has to be 125 proof or less. To be called straight, it has to be at least 2 years old. And then if it happens to be underneath 4 years old, it has to state the age on the bottle. So if you don't see an age in the bottle, you know it's over 4. If you turn it around, might be in small writing. And if it tells you it's 3, then it's 3. And there's some great bourbons at younger ages too. That is what a bourbon aging warehouse looks like. That's one in Bardstown, Kentucky. That's where most of them spend their life. There are a few experiments. It doesn't say it has to be in a warehouse. There's a few experiments you may have heard about, like Jefferson's Ocean. It's one of my favorites. It actually is aged on the back of a ship, but usually it's going to be in a warehouse. And a little about the history of bourbon. Bourbon has been distilled since the 1700s. So we think that it partly was our Scottish ancestors that brought over the idea and said, hey, we don't have barley here, let's use corn. The term was first used in the 1850s. That's when they started saying bourbon. Why was it called bourbon? Some think it was because of the route that it took from Kentucky down to New Orleans, and it ended up on Bourbon Street in the Bourbon region of Louisiana. And they said, give me some of that whiskey like we had there. Some thinks it's Bourbon County. There's all sorts of differing opinions on it, but we know that eventually it became known as bourbon. In 1964, it took on rules as a spirit. And around the late 70s, 80s, down to the 90s, there was a decline in sales of bourbon. Somehow Americans really just wanted to drink vodkas, all kind of flavored vodkas. Again, not that there's anything wrong with flavored vodkas, Blanco tequilas, but that's what was hot. And so you could buy bourbons that were like Pappy 15 or really old stuff in the 90s for, really, really next to nothing for what you'd get it for today. We consider the bourbon boom. There is this thing called the bourbon boom around 2008 and after. And why did the bourbon boom happen? Well, I think people really started getting excited about spirits that were aged, that had more depth of character. Post 9/11, it seems like there was a whole lot of interest in American products. Also, there was a rise in more Southern products, and just it became something that was just flavorful. Pre-Prohibition cocktails came back: the Manhattan, the Sazerac, many being made with bourbons, and just a ton of craft distilleries popping up. Rules became much more favorable to craft distilleries. One of those being Breckenridge, which we'll talk about in a moment. But the last 5 years or so, there's been more barrels of bourbon in Kentucky. Again, bourbon can be made anywhere in the US, but the most of it's made in Kentucky. More barrels of bourbon exist than people that live there. How do you like that? Men, women, children of any age, you name it. There's more barrels than people. So having said that, the craft distilling boom. Okay, this is a large craft distillery, but still we consider it a craft distillery. Breckenridge bourbon. I'm a big fan of Breckenridge. You have that as your first one. Let's go ahead and just take a taste of it. I'll talk about it, then we'll do a little deeper dive as we talk about each of these. But first of all, cheers. You can use any style of glass you want. I usually recommend something that's a little bit shorter, kind of like I have my water in my old-fashioned glass. But here's the Glencairn, right? But this is a glass that's very similar. So anything like that always helps. Shorter is better. What we really want is the least amount of room between our nasal and the liquid itself. So I'll just show you all briefly how I like to taste a bourbon. I just like to take the glass like this, take a little look at it, and I just put my whole nose into it, just like that. Now, why do I rock the glass on the nose, right? And you can back it off from the nose. I don't want you to feel like you have to put your nose in there, but as long as you're really getting those aromatics, that's what's important. I rock the glass, as you saw, because I'm really wanting to force the aromatics into both nostrils. So if you'll join me in doing something that's kind of fun, looks a little silly, take a deep breath into your belly and release it through your nose and feel it. Just feel it on your hand, just like that. Now you're going to feel that one nostril is stronger than the other. And you may have not done this for ages. You may have learned it back in science class way back when, but what's happening is one nostril is dominant, one's recessive. The recessive nostril is going through like this self-cleaning process, changes every 6 to 8 hours. But what I always want to make sure of is that I'm really experiencing it in both nostrils. And as you nose it, keep your mouth open. You can try it both ways. Try it closed. Now try it open. Less burn. Okay, so we're going to take a taste of this, and in a few minutes, as we go through all these, we're going to really talk about each of them. But let's take a quick taste. And again, I don't want you to think you have to nose it every time you taste it. Just do it at your own leisure. At some point, as you're tasting the bourbon or any spirit that you're drinking that's aged, I recommend keeping it in your palate for at least 5 or 6 seconds, especially if it's been aged for quite some time. What we really want to do is experience those flavors from the barrel, because it's been aging in those barrels for a number of years. In the case of Breckenridge, the mixture is anywhere from 6 to 8 years old. So cheers. I'm going to have a little sip with you. We'll talk about the flavor of that one in a moment. I'll tell you briefly about the rest of what we're about to try. Clyde Mays Rye, you also have rye whiskey. As bourbon is at least 51% corn, rye whiskey is at least 51% rye. This is about a 4 to 5 year old rye. And Clyde Mays, the name comes from the family member, their great grandfather, who was a moonshiner. He never made any legal whiskey or spirits in his life, but the family back in 2001 created the distillery, and they're making some beautiful whiskeys. You see their collection there. They do an Alabama style. You all are trying the rye. It's definitely one of my favorite ryes. We'll go back and forth in a moment and taste the bourbon and rye next to each other. The other ones you have are Balcones Baby Blue, corn whiskey, made in Waco, Texas. And that distillery is very well awarded for what they've done the last 10 years or so since they've been around. This one has the base of corn whiskey, basically the base of blue corn, and it's 100% blue corn from Texas. So this is sort of like a bourbon, but a little different because of the barrels they put it in. We'll taste that one. We will also taste the Courage and Conviction, which is an American single malt. If anyone has ever tried, if any of you all have tried the Stratahans whiskeys before from Colorado, that was one of the original American single malts back in the day that came on the American scene. But it's made very similar to the way Scottish single malt is made. And this particular one is aged in different types of barrels. And the last one for the lineup that we'll taste as we do our deeper dive is the Woodford Reserve. It's a classic. It is a much larger distillery than the others, but of all the distilleries in Kentucky, I am a big fan of, the Beams, the Makers, Wild Turkey. Definitely, if you're able to comment down below, tell us what your favorite is, and or tell us your favorite small distillery. Woodford just happens to be one that we're able to get minis of that I just really love. That's a picture of me with the master distiller, Chris Morris at Derby. They are the official bourbon of the Derby. The other interesting thing about Woodford is, and the company, Brown-Forman, they are the only distillery in North America that has their own cooperage. So I showed you barrel stave a moment ago that it takes to make up the barrel. I'm going to show you a little something here. This is barrels basically getting their char on. And the barrels are put together. There's the 35 or so different pieces. And this is inside of the Brown-Forman cooperage. Again, the only brand that owns their own cooperage in North America right now. They make barrels for Jack Daniels, for all their other products, but they make it to spec there at Woodford. And you see the flames, how they went right through that. That's where you get so much of the flavor that a bourbon has. So let's go back to the Breckenridge. I'm going to pour a little bit too, and let's talk about what we get on this. And if you're already sipping the Breckenridge, again, 6 to 12 years old. A good portion of this is made in Breckenridge, Colorado. But when they started their distillery out, they got popular. They got very popular. and they had to start sourcing some whiskeys from Indiana and Kentucky. And they're very transparent about that. So they source the whiskeys, they blend them to spec, and you get this really beautiful flavor of some younger and older whiskeys. I'm going to bring up that tasting wheel. Just one moment. I'm going to bring up that once again to make sure that we take a look at the tasting wheel. That way you can really get an idea of what the flavors are, and see what you taste. And again, tell us down below what you taste. There's no wrong answer. And if you don't really feel like you're tasting as much as you want to on this first one, the more you taste along on the others, I think it suddenly becomes very apparent what the differences are. Okay, so here's the tasting wheel. Again, bourbonblog.com/wheel. I'm going to rock it back and forth. Move it around in your mouth however you want. I do what some people in Kentucky call the Kentucky chew. I just let it get in every part of my mouth. A few things I get off the top, I can tell it's a bourbon. Why can I tell it's a bourbon? It's those beautiful caramel corns, the vanillas. Those are really signature and hallmark for a bourbon versus other kinds of whiskeys. There's sweetness in this. There's not too much sweetness. I usually go left to right and I start asking myself the question, am I getting almond? Am I getting nuttiness? Am I getting smokiness, coffee? As I get closer to the top, I start thinking about cinnamon, baking spices. I get a lot of baking spices on Breckenridge. Again, there's nobody put any spices in this, right? Nobody emptied any cinnamon or clove in this. Why do those flavors pop out? It's because the distillate, that clear spirit that they put into the barrel, has interacted with the barrel and it's brought these flavors out. As we go over to the quadrant of fruit, I don't get a ton of fruit off of Breckenridge. Again, if you do, if you get something that's not even on this wheel that none of us mentioned here, you certainly, it's what you get. It's your palate. That's what I love about this. It's an individual experience. I might get a little bit of orange peel on this, but on the whole, it's really in the spices, not much floral. Going over to sweets, I get a lot of the sweetness. I get the caramel corn. I get the vanillas. For those of y'all who are in the South, like me, a good part of the year, one of the notes that I most frequently get is this buttery bread, butter cornbread. Some really good buttered cornbread on this. But again, what makes this bourbon special? I showed you the pictures a few moments ago of the mountains. Well, part of what makes it special is the minerality in the water as it comes down mountains like Mount Baldy. I did a video a few years ago that you can find on our Bourbon Blog YouTube channel where we climbed the Mount Baldy near Breckenridge, and we actually filmed it showing how the water melts down the mountain. So when you see on the bottle, snow melt mountain water, well, that water, as it's melted down the mountain, has picked up minerality through rocks, through streams, through little pebbles. And it really comes out just beautiful. Breckenridge does a variety of other products. They do a bourbon finish in a rum barrel, a sherry barrel. They do some vodkas. The very newest thing they do is that bourbon finish in a rum barrel, one of their rum barrels. They make rum too. I love it, but just the real standard one, I'm a big fan of, and I hope you all are too. And I'm reading a few of these comments. It sounds like you all are fans of bourbon, and some of you all have been on the bourbon trail. And we'll try to get to all of your questions here in a few minutes. But let's go ahead and go to Clyde Mays for our rye whiskey. Okay, so we said earlier, rye whiskey, little different than a bourbon. It's at least 51% rye. This one's close to 80+% rye. And what I would recommend, you certainly don't have to, but if you happen to have two different glasses, I'd like to go back and forth a little bit and talk about bourbons and ryes. So go ahead and give that a nose. And one thing, since we've already tried one, I would kind of, if I were you, just go back and forth. One glass in one hand of the rye, one glass in one hand of the bourbon. Go back and forth and explore these a little bit. bourbon. You're definitely going to get sweetness on both of these, but what are you getting on the bourbon? If you're just nosing them now, certainly feel free to taste by all means, but what are you getting between the two that's different? What bourbon and rye, one of my favorite parts about talking about the differences is not just the flavor, because there are some flavor differences. And one of the ones that I always hear mentioned most often is the spice. And there is more spice in most ryes. But if we look at the nose, the characteristics, our olfactory actually communicates with our brain just a fraction. I mean, it's such a fraction of a time quicker than our taste buds do. But the olfactory really just puts it right there in the brain. So you can nose it, take a breath, go back and forth and nose these. And I'm going to bring up the tasting wheel once again. So the thing that I get that's so different on the nose is that floral note. There's a little bit of floral on rye whiskeys. The other thing there's a little bit of is this, and it's a beautiful, in a beautiful way, I'll say this, it's kind of funky. Most ryes are slightly funky, kind of like if you're a fan of IPA beer, it's a little funkier than lagers or other beers. I think rye whiskey is sort of like the IPA of whiskey. It's funky. It has this touch of pickly note. Usually, again, it all depends on how much rye is in that mash bill, that recipe. But that's what I look for. If anyone ever gives me a bourbon and a rye and I'm trying to figure out which is which doesn't happen very often, but if you're doing a blind tasting with friends, it can be kind of fun. That's what I look for. That pickly, that more intense note, maybe a little bit more floral. Bourbon's a little calmer, a little more caramel. On this particular rye, again, I put the flavor wheel back up. This has some real thickness. This is also a non-chill filtered whiskey. So many whiskeys are chill filtered. What that means is they've gone through a filtration process, mainly for aesthetics, so that when they go to different places, different areas of the country or the world, temperatures change, they don't get foggy. Non-chill filters whiskeys usually look a little thicker, and there's nothing wrong either way. It just leaves a little bit more flavor, a little bit more barrel in there. That color is literally barrel. I mean, it's not pieces of barrel, but over time it's molecules. They've transformed. So on this one, I get clove on the nose. I get a touch of smoke, black pepper on the palate. And please tell down below what you get on this Clyde Mays. I'd love to hear it. I always hear new notes. It always helps. You also see this descriptor called herbal tea. I get some herbal tea too, like not like Earl Grey, but it kind of has this extraction that comes from the barrel. I don't get a ton of fruit, maybe a touch. Probably if I thought about it enough, I could find berries. That's the other thing too. You probably have been to plenty of wine tastings or anything else where someone like myself will suggest, do you get berries or lemon? Or, I just want to make sure you get what you get and that you like it. And if you don't, that's okay too. Hopefully you'll find a favorite of all these. But I think we can all, if we're told, look for this, we can sometimes find it. But sometimes it's just fun to think about it, contrast, compare. Honeys. One thing I get on this one a lot is a real nice milk chocolate note. So again, tell down below what you get on Clyde Mays. If you do like this one, I really recommend their bourbon. And one of the most interesting things they do is the Alabama whiskey, that they make a bourbon and they put baked dried apples in the barrel at the end. It sounds a little odd, but it actually is just a very nice touch of citrus. All right, the next one that I believe you all have is the Balcones Baby Blue. Does everybody have the Baby Blue? Let me know if you do. Hopefully you do have the Baby Blue from Balcones. It is an extremely interesting whiskey. It is from Waco, Texas. It is a small craft distillery. And if you're a fan of blue corn chips, right? You like the white corn chips, you like the blue ones. You may have had a variety, and I've seen for 4th of July, they even have red, white, and blue ones. You know, blue corn chips taste different. And so in this case, blue corn tastes different in whiskey. And this is blue corn that is straight from Texas. And I see Mark is saying he gets a smoky note on this. This is very smoky. It's something about the blue corn when it is distilled, Mark, that it really comes across more smoky on the nose, smoke, maybe even a touch of cream. I mean, it's kind of a dichotomy. This is the beauty of this whiskey, because there are other blue corn whiskeys. There's not a ton of them in the U.S., but this is, to me, just, you know, it's sweet, it's smoky. It has this roasted note, maybe even a touch of coffee. Very sweet corn. You know, I mean, again, this is a little higher proof. We're getting close to that 92 proof mark. They do one that's called True Blue, that's a barrel proof of this. If you're a fan of single malts, they do a single malt that's beautiful too. Everything they do is very well constructed. Again, they are a large craft distillery. There are small craft distilleries. There's probably some near you. And again, I'm really watching what y'all are saying down below. And if you have any favorite craft distilleries, tell me. You know, part of what I love doing is interviews and visits to distilleries. And I do a lot of those throughout the year. And it's fun to see the innovation at distilleries that back when they created this product 10, 12 years ago, they saw not many people were doing a blue corn, and they went with it because as a smaller distillery, they could. So oaky, vanilla. You all are great tasters. I really, I love what you're saying there. But again, this is 3 to 5 years old. This is not that old. Some batches are even younger, but I think it has a lot of characteristics. And I know we mentioned coffee. I saw a couple people mention coffee. If you are a coffee fan, I'll put the link up below, but I'll just say this. If you liked the Breckenridge, because I had a little bit of extra time on my hands doing these virtual tastings during the pandemic, and I'm a huge coffee fan as well. I did this experiment with Breckenridge Distillery and a coffee roaster from Wyoming called Janus Coffee Roasters. And they went and grabbed some barrels that I knew were at Breckenridge that had just been emptied. And they put coffee beans into the barrels. The bourbon sweat, you know, the sweat of the bourbon, it basically imparted its love onto the coffee beans. And we made this wonderful bourbon blanc coffee. So if you're interested later, I put the link up down below. bourbonblanc.com/coffee is the place to go. It's just fun. It's not really non-alcoholic. If you drink it in the morning, it might have a fraction of a % of alcohol in it, but it'll taste a little bit like bourbon. So I'm glad there's some fellow coffee drinkers. Now, on to another whiskey category. You all are one of the first groups, I'll tell you this, that I have tasted this Courage and Conviction whiskey with. Part of the reason is they just released their whiskey like 5 or 6 months ago, and I only tasted it just a few weeks ago. And I get the opportunity. You see a lot of whiskeys behind me, and I'm lucky in the fact that I get to review some really unique bourbons and whiskeys. But I get to try a lot of stuff, and there's a lot of good, as you all know, Kentucky bourbons out there, interesting whiskeys, but so many of them, to me, not all, but a lot of them, 80%, 70%, I don't know, somewhere in there, maybe taste like something else. And I think, that's good, and I would enjoy a pour of it. But occasionally something will come to me as a review sample, or I'll stumble on it, and I'll say, this is something different. This really takes me by surprise. That was the case with Courage and Conviction. I knew it was a single malt. I didn't know much about it. I tried it, and it's so good. So here's what it is. It's 100% malted barley. It's made at Virginia Distilling in Virginia. They've been working on this with some big experts on Japanese whiskey and other whiskeys for a number of years. And what they've done is, some of you all mentioned you're a fan of Angel's Envy, and there's some other bourbons that do something similar. Angel's Envy and some other bourbons, not all bourbons, I don't want to confuse the point, will take bourbon, they'll put it in that first barrel, they'll empty it out of that barrel. What happens to that first bourbon barrel? Usually goes to Scotland, they make beer out of it, whatever it might be. But most bourbons are just bottled from there as a straight bourbon, right? Or proofed down. But some bourbons they'll put into a secondary barrel. That's called, so it's always first cask, primary cask. Primary cask can be used for a year. Some bourbons are 15 years old, whatever the distiller decides. The secondary barrel is what's called the finishing or secondary cask. The finish on Angel's Envy is port wine. It's a used port wine cask. When they empty it, there's like 2 or 3 gallons left of port in there. So it basically, again, swims it out of the barrel, combining those molecules. But occasionally, a whiskey will do 100% aging in a cask like a used sherry cask or a used bourbon cask, something like that. That is what Courage and Conviction is. It's not a new charred oak barrel. It is an empty bourbon barrel. So they have 3 lots. They make the whiskey, they distill it. They have 3 lots. They have 1 lot that's sherry, used sherry barrels from Spain. They have sherry trapped inside. They put the Courage and Conviction in. They have another lot that is bourbon. They put those in there. More bourbon flavor gets on there. And the 3rd lot is something that's fairly new in the world of whiskey. It is called cuvee. The cuvee cask is a used red wine barrel from Spain or Portugal. Now we're talking about like table wines, not sweet wines, table wines. Tempranillo, perfect example. They empty out the red wine. They shave the inside of the barrel and they rechar it. So you get little touches of that. But with this one, Courage and Conviction, they blend all 3 of those different barrels together with a different blend. You can also buy 100% of each, but their flagship product is this Courage and Conviction. And to me, it's really something dynamite. It just has so much complexity on it. If you are an American single malt fan, you already know just how special of a category it is. What does single malt mean? Single malt in Scotland means something completely different than, well, it means something a little different. And I'm gonna show this to you just real briefly because I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. If this was Scotch, and it is not, Scotch has to be made in Scotland, has to be 3 years old. In Scotland, there's 2 different types of whiskeys. There's malt whiskey, there's grain. Usually it's malt whiskey. That's usually what they're making. But you see those 5 classifications underneath. There's blends, there's blended grain, there's single grain. The most popular one, like the Macallans, the Glenfiddichs, the Glenrothes, some of my favorites, the Dalmore is one of my favorites. They're what's called single malt. Single doesn't mean single, like one kind of malt. It means one single distillery. And that's what this is. It's one single distillery, 100% malt. It's still an evolving category in the US. Let's do a quick taste of it. This is just so, to me, this is one of the most unique whiskeys I've tasted in a while. I mean, I stumble on something and I say, I haven't had anything like this for a while. This is that. It's so good. I get orange on this. For some reason, if you're a fan of Cointreau or Grand Marnier Cognac, I get kind of that Grand Marnier Cognac, but a little of that other old world wine. It's just delicious. It is so good. So again, people ask me, what's one of your favorite bourbons or whiskeys? A lot of times it's what I've most recently discovered. This is definitely in that most recently discovered category, not of bourbon, but of single malt that I like, American single malt. Okay, for this last one, I wanted to throw a good solid Kentucky bourbon in. There are some Kentucky bourbons. Again, I'll tell you just real briefly. Not in your box, they don't even make minis of. I'm a huge fan of Peerless. If you can find Peerless rye or bourbon, it is just dynamite. I love what they're doing. They're a pre-prohibition distillery that recently came back 5 years ago. I love Jefferson's Ocean. I love the nuances in Jefferson's Ocean. I wouldn't put it in a cocktail, but it's been aged in the back of a ship. But when it comes to like really good solid bourbons that I think just, if somebody pours me a Woodford and they don't tell me what it is, they're like, guess what Kentucky bourbon this is? I always know it's Woodford. It has one of the most distinct characteristics of any bourbon whiskey in the country. It's those caramel corns. It's the way Chris Morris does it. It's those barrels they make. It is solid. It is something that whether you're a beginner or a pro and somebody wants to pour you a Woodford, if somebody brings me a bottle of Woodford, I'm always just more than thrilled. I love this. So again, what do I like about it? I'll nose it with you. I'll taste it. It's chocolate. It's that creaminess. It's the caramel corn. It's spices. It's just a great balance. I mean, what do I like about a good bourbon, a good cocktail, even a good gin? For those of you all that are gin fans, sometimes we write about gin. I like balance. I like to get flavors that are balanced. I don't want something that's overdone one way or the other, too sweet, too smoke. To me, it's about balance, and that's what Woodford is. So those are a few favorites. Again, happy to answer questions. I know that Chris has been watching some of the questions, and you all are awesome. You have great palates too. I've been watching this. You have great palates.
There's a lot of questions here. So
all right, let's do it.
So actually, Edward Terry asked I think it's a great question because it's something when I go on vacation, I want to know what are some really good distilleries that are worth, visiting during the summer months? What are some great destination places?
Well, that's a good question. So, Edward and everybody who's, traveling, I would always, first of all, look ahead, see what distilleries are open right now. More and more opening up, doing new experiences, doing more improved experiences. If you're coming to Kentucky, first of all, feel free to reach out. I'll try to give you some guidance. I love the Peerless experience. Of course, Woodford and Versailles, Kentucky is amazing. Jim Beam, though it's a massive distillery, I still love what they do and I love their experience. It's hard to go wrong with one on the Bourbon Trail. So many new distilleries are popping up in Tennessee. Look, for any of y'all in Tennessee or going to Tennessee, there's more distilleries there. Not that they're making more whiskey. There's many more than Kentucky. So Tennessee has their own whiskey trail now. I'm a big fan of Chattanooga whiskey. I know Chattanooga is kind of on a lot of people's way down to Florida or up from someplace. I love the Chattanooga whiskey. It's so interesting and different. They have a great tasting room there. There's just so many in Tennessee that are the big ones too. George Dickel, Jack Daniels. If you're going down to Florida, there's a number of new distilleries that have popped up. St. Augustine is beautiful. They have a great experience.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great distillery. It's one of my favorites. Yeah.
Have you been there? You like that?
Okay. I love that place. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good. If you're going to Texas, I mean, these are just a few, but again, we try to cover as many as we can on Bourbon Blog. And again, tell me some of yours too, because occasionally I'll be doing one of these tastings and somebody will say, there's just like 2,500 distilleries now. We're finally getting back up there. I always like to discover new ones. So good question.
Now, that was a great question. So Christopher Colebrook has another question. He goes, I'm hesitant to get into Japanese whiskey. Are there any good compared to traditional whiskey?
Okay. So coincidentally, one of the flavors that they were really trying to go for on that Courage and Conviction, Christopher, was Japanese whiskey. One of the distillers and top blenders for a well-known Japanese distillery called Cavalon actually helped Courage and Conviction. So I think this tastes a lot like Japanese whiskey, but I'll give you a little tip. One of the Japanese whiskeys that's not too expensive that I love, that you can find a lot of places that they're not going to kill you on the price for, like those Yamazakis that have gone up like 10 times, is called Nobushi. Nobushi. Nobushi is really nice, 4 to 5 years old, aged in used bourbon barrels, blended from 2 distilleries. They won't tell us which they are.
All right. Man, the chat is very active here. So I'm
I'm
trying
so
to keep,
glad.
I'm trying to keep up.
We do this thing called Bourbon Blog Live, and we do it several times a week. If anybody's interested, if you didn't, you may have had enough of me for today, but tonight I'll be interviewing Neil Giraldo, who is Pat Benatar's husband. He has
Oh yeah, I know him. Yeah, he's yeah. No, I'm a music fan. I know who he is. Yeah.
He's great. So I'll be interviewing him on Bourbon Blog Live at 7 p.m. Central, 8 Eastern. We'll be tasting through his 3-chord bourbons, and I'll be the first to try the new batch of the Whiskey Drummer, which is 15 years old. So subscribe to Bourbon Blog YouTube. We do a couple of these a week, and and so I love on the chats we do. I was going to say on our lives, I watch them. So
someone Joe Stanley asked if there's any recommendations in the Front Royal, Hume, Virginia area.
Virginia whiskeys, I don't know about that particular area, but I would say Virginia whiskeys, Virginia Distilling Company. I'll tell you another I love. It's called Wasman's Whiskey. It is, they have it in Williamsburg and in, I'm forgetting the name of the town. Williamsburg is where their headquarters is. And I love what they do. They make a single malt American whiskey. They make some bourbons. That's another favorite of mine from Virginia. But if I find any down there, I'll let you know.
All right. So I've got 2 more questions. So I got Michael Good wants to know what makes I forget the name of it, but there was the rye was Alabama style. So what makes that Alabama style?
Good question. So the Alabama style whiskey that Clyde Mays does is actually something they trademarked. So if you see Alabama style on it, it's made by Clyde Mays. That's that baked dry apple they have in that. They take a bourbon, they put a dry apple inside of it for the last few months of aging. The rye whiskey you have is actually, it's made in Alabama, but it is not Alabama style. It's a little confusing, but everything they do is really good. We're finding them in more and more markets. So I like what they do.
All right. So Gary has a question around, does the bourbon change as it ages in the bottle?
I love this question. Okay. So this is interesting. It usually doesn't. If you have a bottle, I have bottles of whiskey all around me that are at different stages. This Woodford, there's like less than 20% left. If you have something like a bourbon bottle that has this much left, drink it in the next 6 months to a year, because it could do what is called oxidize. The oxygen is too heavy here. It affects the whiskey. However, if you have over halfway full or about halfway full, it should last for a long time. It should last for a number of years, maybe even a decade. If you have a full bottle that is sealed or that has just gently been cracked into, like this Ocean, I mean, the truth is it could last the rest of your life. I mean, they found whiskeys that are several hundred years old. They don't believe they change too much if they're sealed completely and in a normal temperature location. So wines do change. They can be very unpredictable. I love wine. I'm actually friends with Dave Finney, who, if you go on to bourbonblog.com, you'll see Scottie Pippen and Dave Finney just announced yesterday they're releasing a bourbon together just for Chicago market for now. But I love wines, but they can be unpredictable. Even if you read a book that says open it in 2 years, it's a little bit more of a tough beast. But whiskey isn't usually.
All right. One more. So another question is, what's your go-to whiskey for making a drink? I'm a huge old-fashioned fan, so Brad asked a question too. So what's your go-to whiskey for making, like, let's say, an old-fashioned?
Yeah. Wow. So many good ones. I mean, so I think here's one fun thing you can do for a project, right? And if you need a good excuse to make several drinks with friends, is take like 3 different whiskeys and try making your favorite drink. Old fashioned, Manhattan. I'll tell you another favorite of mine is the Revolver. It's made with a little bit of coffee liqueur. And then we have a recipe up on Bourbon Blog. But
I have to check that out.
Yeah, the Revolver is good. As you asked, Chris, the old fashioned, I would say of the ones we had today, I would probably go for the Breckenridge. Has a little more citrus forward. The Woodford's beautiful in an old fashioned. I'm also, I know we mentioned several different ryes. I'm also a big fan of Whistle Pig. And Whistle Pig's now doing a 6-year-old, not the 10, so it's about half the price. I would go for the Whistle Pig for an old fashioned. You could do bourbon or rye in an old fashioned. The original old fashioned was said to have been invented with Old Forester bourbon back in the day at the Pendimus Club in Louisville. That's what they say. But I would just try several different whiskeys out, use the same bitters, use a different bourbon, and see what you like. That's the greatest part of this, is experimenting. Another one of my favorite things to do is, just like we did with you, take 5 different whiskeys on your friend, your spouse, whoever it might be, but don't tell them what they are. See what they rate the best one as. And sometimes it's going to be one that you don't expect, because the label, the brand, the name, it always may influence. But you know what? If you, and again, happy to answer more questions, but always feel free. Tom@bourbonblog.com. If you want to do a whiskey experience in person, we are back on the road. If you want to do one virtually, always happy to do it virtually. And I'll let you on a little secret here, Chris. In the next month or so, just like what you all got in the mail, I'm actually beginning to curate my own whiskey club. So if you are interested in being a part of that whiskey box club, we're going to do this whiskey box club. Just drop me a line at tom@bourbonblog.com. Just put the subject line box, and I'll promise that you'll be one of the first to know about this.
All right. I mean, that sounds interesting. So I have one last question for you.
Yeah, you
And
do
we
it.
talked,
Please,
we talked about it before. So it's an age-old discussion of whether it's neat or on rocks, right? So it's a religious conversation almost, right? So do we do on the rocks or do we do neat when we drink bourbon?
How do you usually do yours, Chris? Just out of curiosity.
I like it. Traditionally I like it on ice because I like it colder.
So here's the thing. Part of it is just typically it's a lot of things are personal preference, but I'll tell you why ice sometimes works for some people. Ice does 2 things. It dilutes, right? So it melts quickly in alcohol. And so if it's a high proof bourbon, like I have like 115 proof bourbon over here, 120 proof bourbon, it can basically get it down to a lower drinking point that's more palatable for some people. The other thing it does, rather than just be refreshing on a nice summer day, anything cold, get this. Why do we drink milk cold? Why do we drink Coca-Cola cold? Why do we have white wine and some beers cold? The reason is it brings out the sweeter flavors. So the human palate senses and perceives anything on ice or cold, even, get this, even cold pizza. We eat it for breakfast because we like sweet things for breakfast. Why? Because it's sweeter. Try it both ways. Take the same whiskey, try the Woodford on ice, try it neat. You're always going to get sweeter flavors. And sometimes I'll just be in the mood for something sweet and I'll put it on the rocks. But no matter how you do it, there's no right or wrong way. If you want to add a mixer to it, a Coke to it, we just want you to be happy with, how you drink it. It's all about your happiness. And Chris, Colleen, everybody there, I can't thank you enough for having me in. We do a lot with ConvergeOne and all the friends and partners and clients here. It means a lot to be having a nice thirsty Thursday with you.
No, and we can't thank you enough, Tom. I appreciate you joining early too. So we actually were ahead of schedule, so that was good. So I appreciate that, and I thank you for this. Was one of the most successful events we've ever had at ConvergeOne. It's one of the most largest events we've ever had at ConvergeOne. So my thanks to everyone that attended, that spent 4 hours with us. So I'm going to sign off. I'm going to say cheers to everyone. And thank you for all of our presenters and for everyone that participated. So thank you very much. And we look forward to following up with you. I appreciate your time today, and you guys have a great rest of your Thursday. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all so much. Colleen, Chris.
All right.
Cheers.
Take care.
Cheers.
Thank you all.